Show caution when accepting eager roommate applicants because you never know just how attached they're gonna get. Today we're discussing Single White Female, a 90s thriller full of jealousy, diabolical scheming, and New York's most deadly shoe. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I love myself like this.
This is a movie podcast, and we are currently working through 90s erotic thriller season. This is our second episode of said season. This is Single White Female that we're doing today from 1992, directed by Barbet Schroeder. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that, but
Works for me.
That's fine. We'll start spoiler free, of course, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we get into the spoilers, but if you are enjoying the show and you're on YouTube, please do hit the like button. It helps us out a bunch if you do. And of course, you can get bonus shows from us over at Patreon, but I'll tell you more about that at the end of the show. Single White Female is a title that I have heard, and I'm pretty sure I might have only heard of it because I don't remember the episode, but there's an episode of the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer where someone refers to someone as being single white femaled. It was a pop culture reference in the 90s, and I guess I just remember that reference, so I knew the movie's title from that.
That's weird, though, because you would think if it were enough... Because, like, when was Buffy, roughly, do you think that episode came out?
Probably in the first few seasons, so between 97 and 99. So
it at least had enough staying power for like 5 years later, and yet I swear to God, I've never heard anyone talk about this movie at all.
I bet you it played on cable a lot in the 90s. That's my guess. So people writing sense. Buffy and whoever else, it probably was around if you were paying attention to those movies at that time. Obviously, you know, I was but 3 years old when this came out, and you were what, -1?
Around about, yeah.
So yeah, that's something we were necessarily going to, you know, hear about as much as say something like Basic Instinct, which was definitely a more famous, more lasting kind of movie. So yeah, but it did make me curious. So I was like, okay, what is this movie? I don't really know. I know nothing about it. I don't even remember the context of that reference on Buffy, so I can't even from that try and extrapolate what this is, other than just I assume someone is dangerous. That's the only thing I knew going in.
I mean, I think we could say that for every single part of this season.
Yeah,
there's going to be someone along the way who's dangerous.
I mean, that's, just because it's the thrillers, so yeah, presumably someone will provide some thrills at a certain point. But other than that, I didn't really know anything, didn't even know who was in it until I started doing research for the season and like picking out the movies, and it seemed like an obvious one to do.
Yeah, for sure. So, I will say I was a bit confused at first. I'm subscribed to HBO Max, now just Max, and...
The place to go for HBO, yeah.
Yes. But they, when I searched for this movie, it came up as Single White Female, and then like parentheses, the movie. So I was very confused if this was like a TV show, or if there was some like remake or something, but I couldn't find anything at all about that.
I mean, first I'm hearing about any possible other thing called Single White Female.
Yeah,
Sounds
exactly.
like just someone working at, the intern at HBO office put in a title weird. That's what it sounds like.
It sounds to me like it's like a self-deprecating thing, where it's like, hey, Jennifer, could you put this in? Single White Female, yourself being one. And she's like, oh yeah, well here's the movie version, and then there's me. The actual one.
Yeah, I mean, it's just Single White Female on IMDb, and I'm looking...
Yeah, no, Max just has it in weird. I don't know why.
Yeah, I've never seen it in any other variation. The only thing I could think of is that maybe if it was based on a book, they might put that in, but even then, it's still weird to say the movie when it's based on a book.
I mean, it is based on a book, because that was in the opening credits, at least. It was called, like, SWF Seeking Man, or Male, or something like that.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. But yeah, the basic premise of the movie, though, is that Bridget Fonda plays Allison, and she breaks up with her fiancé because he had sex with his ex-wife, and she puts out an ad. She's a single white female looking for a roommate, and gets a bunch of applicants, but ultimately lands on Hedra, who they kind of call Hetty for most of the movie, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, who, might be dangerous, who might be unhealthy in the way she sort of latches on to Allison, and I'll just leave it there. That's your basic premise. Some things might not go well.
Believe it or not, here's the thing: I haven't seen a lot of Jason Leigh. So when I saw her in,
I'm sorry, hold on. I'm pretty sure Jason Leigh is actually just the name of another actor, so it feels
That's
weird
fine.
to refer to her as
Jason
Jason Leigh.
Fair enough.
Isn't that My Name is Earl? Isn't that Jason Leigh?
Is it? It's spelled different if it is.
I think it is spelled different, but still. I mean,
Yeah. All right. So Jennifer Jason Leigh. I've not seen a lot of her, but the one thing that I definitely recognized her in immediately was Hateful Eight.
yeah,
by
that's
Tarantino.
that's the first thing I think of her from.
Yeah. So that kind of informed the way I looked at her character in this movie, and I'm not going to say whether or not I was correct in doing so, but it was a choice. It definitely informed in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Bridget Fonda's kind of like, obviously she's the daughter and granddaughter of two very famous actors, Peter and Henry Fonda, right?
Yes.
You know, we saw Henry in 12 Angry Men over in Criterion Cut, which you can get on Patreon or via YouTube membership, just to throw in a plug for our 12 Angry Men discussion. But she, like, I think the only thing I really saw her in relatively young, as in I was relatively young, was probably like Placid, because she's in that.
Okay.
I've seen her in a couple of things over the years. Like she was in A Simple Plan. I only saw that a couple of years ago. But I think I want to say she just kind of quit acting like around 2000-ish.
Yeah, she retired in 2002.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, so she's kind of this weird, like, I don't know. You almost know that. I mean, this is kind of silly because this is true of any actor, but I feel like with most actors, when you say, oh, you think of a specific sort of era when you think of an actor, it tends to be longer than just a decade. But with her, it is just kind of the 90s.
Yeah, I'm seeing here there was an uncredited child role in 1969. She had like 7 roles up until 1990, and then she just dominated through the 90s. Just like several films every year, and then the moment 2002 hit, gone.
Oh, and Jackie Brown's the other big one, actually, another Tarantino reference.
Yes, absolutely.
So we got 2 Tarantino or future Tarantino stars in this movie. But yeah, you know, so just kind of this weird thing where she disappeared after a fact. So I don't really have anything meaningful to say about that, just that other than it was on my mind as I was like, hey, her from that era. That just, you know.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I don't really know her. Looking through the filmography here, there's nothing that I really remember her from. There's films that I've seen, but I didn't like pick her out of the cast from those. So when she came into this movie, she may as well have just been a blank slate for me. I had no idea who she really was, except for, you know, her credit come up saying Fonda. I immediately was like, oh, okay, I know the Fonda family. My bad.
David, the professional. I asked for some professionalism on the show.
I understand, and that's why you can't see the mess of the desk this high into frame.
Yes. Now, part of me wants to think, oh, it's some cat dishes that you knocked over, but I know in my heart of hearts that it's a bunch of empty cans of Coke because you've got a problem.
No, I don't. I don't have a problem.
For the audio listeners, he is now chugging from those empty cans of Coke, proving that they are there.
I want to give you a rough count, but I genuinely don't have one.
Oh, dear. Do you know what's so funny, right? Get into this movie is that for some reason when I heard single white female, I didn't think of the word single in context of like relationship status. I thought it just meant one white female as opposed to 2 white female.
I mean, fair enough. I guess it works in both contexts, but I immediately went to relationship status. That
I don't know why.
Pretty obvious.
I have no excuse for it. It's just that's where my mind went. Is like single white female, as in like it's like a police description where you're like, oh, we're looking for one white female because that's the suspect. Right. That's what it makes me think of, I guess, for whatever reason.
I mean, in that context, it kind of works in both. Like,
true.
If you view it through the police context, I could see that being a little double entendre there.
Not that it matters much. It's just amusing. But yeah, I guess we'll get into get our general feelings and vibes and anything we want to talk about without spoilies, and then we'll take it from there. David, what did you think of Single White Female?
So, if Basic Instinct was doing a really good job of playing up the mystery, the idea of like who's really behind it, like what's really going on, and all that sort of stuff, this one completely fails at that. It has no interest in doing a mystery. It is 100% in your face, like here's what's going to happen, and we're just doing that. But I think what it does succeed in is ratcheting up the idea of the tension, the idea of how far are things going to go until they finally just reach a breaking point? Like, how far are these characters going to end up destroying each other by the end of this? And I think it does a pretty good job at that. I will say at certain points in this, it gets really predictable. Like, even without any sort of media literacy, I feel like you can see some stuff happening. But I also think there are just as many moments where it is a genuine shock as to what comes next. I literally can't say without spoiling it, but there is a moment in this where I was genuinely caught off guard that they did something as early as they did. I was expecting it, but they did it very early, and I was very shocked by it. But no, it's I think it does a good job of ratcheting up tension and all that, but in the end, it does just kind of feel like a by the book sort of thriller. It doesn't feel like it does anything that creatively new with how it plays with different relationships or reveals or stuff like that. It's just you let someone in your life that you shouldn't have, and now you have to pay the consequences until you get to the end of it.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag, ultimately. It's not terrible by any means. It's got some decent ideas, it's got some decent kind of like set piece moments. Although I will say that anytime something violent is happening in this movie, I actually think it's kind of laughably bad at points. Just something about the performances, like how they've choreographed it. It feels like it's not quite like watching an old school episode of Star Trek where like, the fake fighting is really fake, but there's just an element of, oh, like the way that, like someone's fighting back in this scene feels just a little bit fake. Like they're kind of like holding back their strength a little bit to make the moment work, but it doesn't feel believable and raw and visceral because of that. It feels like two actors pretending to be in this tense moment. There's a couple of moments that did outright make me laugh unintentionally. That kind of came from that. It kind of feels like it's trying to visually. It feels like it's trying to harken back to an era before this for thrillers. It feels like it's trying to be like a 70s thriller, or even to some extent a Hitchcockian style thriller, in terms of how it's trying to look, in terms of its pacing, in terms of it's not about a mystery so much, right? There's a few things to reveal, but for the most part, it's more about, okay, you can kind of see where this is going. It's more about how this character is going to get to a boiling point to where they actually do something worse, where they do something a bit more extreme, a bit more whatever. And I think conceptually that's fine. I think it's done reasonably enough here. But I will say, I never really found either of the main characters all that compelling, and that's kind of a bit of a hurdle in a movie like this where it's all about them. I never really felt like I was really attached or cared about Allison, the main character. I never really found myself like compelled in that, oh, they're playing like a crazy character like to Hetty, played by Jason Leigh. I never got that sort of like, you know, some like other movies with like characters who are kind of crazy or kind of like unhinged or whatever, they're fascinating to watch. Like they give you a performance that's so captivating, and I'm not saying she does a bad job with it. Part of me thinks that the character's just kind of really generic in this sense. Like, it doesn't feel, like you said, it didn't do anything original, and I kind of agree with that. But I think less so the events and the plot is the problem for me, and more the fact that even just the characters feel like we're almost going just through the motions of the type of characters that would be in this, as opposed to giving me actually fully formed, interesting characters that I can get kind of invested in. And whether that's because I care about them and want them to survive, or I just find their Joker-like antics, not that she's the Joker, but I'm just, again, it's a good comparison of like, hey, Heath Ledger is the Joker. He's like, every second he's on screen, you can't take your eyes off him. He's captivating. I didn't feel anything like that. I'm not saying it has to even get half as good as that for me to say it's achieved what it's trying to do, but here, I don't think Hetty ever quite captured that for me. So I was very lukewarm for most of the movie, I would say.
Yeah, I would fully agree with the Hetty stuff, is that it feels like it should be a very complex and complicated character. It should be something that has like this weird balancing act of menace and yet also, you know, they want to be your friend, and so they're like very sweet, and it's a very hard character to pull off. But I feel like, again, it's not even the actress's fault that much. It just feels like they weren't written as complicated as they should have been in the idea of what this plot needed.
You keep waiting for an extra layer, like something else that we didn't know about that kind of like enriches it, and it never really quite gets there. There's a couple of moments where it almost like teases like a really interesting, if not direction for the story to go in, but at least certainly something that does feel a bit more unique or ahead of its time, and it kind of chickens out or doesn't like capitalize on those moments when they do come up. I'll talk about them more in spoilers, of course. They're very specific, but it just kind of like always like comes back. The car always backs up into the safe like parking spot of this is where it's safe. This is where we know it's all fine. And for an erotic thriller to just feel safe the whole time, yeah, I mean, sure, there's some nudity, there's some sexual moments, but it's not like it actually feels like it's pushing it and all, and oh, hey, we've got some nudity, we can say we've got boobs and stuff, so we can sell the movie on that.
I was going to say, this is an erotic thriller only in the sense that it is rated for nudity and sexual situations. It is not inherent to the plot itself by any means.
Well, okay, I mean, it kind of is, but
I know what you're talking about, but I will argue like that easily could not have existed and it would have been the same thing.
And look, it's not as baked into the premise as, say, Basic Instinct, but I don't like. I think if you're going to sit and split hairs about how much erotic is tied to the plot to qualify it as an erotic thriller, that feels like a tiring like debate to have every single time we do one of these.
I'm not saying it doesn't qualify as erotic thriller, but I do think that it is thrown in there in order to try to appeal to that sort of audience, to try to appeal, like you said, like, hey, we got boobs in it.
Yeah, no, okay, I agree with that. Yeah, it's in there as a bit of flavor to try and make it more exciting, but you could tone down all the erotic parts and it wouldn't really alter that much. That said, though, it would probably feel even more bland.
Oh, absolutely.
I also acknowledge that as well.
Absolutely.
It's the only space it has, by and large. So, and to be fair, this movie is not like super high rated on IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes. It's not got ultra low ratings, but it's not got, you know, it's very in the middle. It's not like this is remembered for being the best thing ever or even the worst thing ever. So it's not surprising to me ultimately to watch it and find out, oh yeah, it's a very middling thriller. Released by Columbia, aka Sony, which is, you know, like,
some things never change.
I mean, in that sense, it is better than, say, I mean, what was the last Sony movie we did?
Well, over on the Patreon, I got one for you. Madam Web.
Okay, that's a very low bar. I was going for more their generic, but yeah, I guess you could pick it. You know, Morbius, pick any of those movies. Yeah. This is better than those, but like, it is just the bare minimum good enough. Not really, but
yeah, I really feel like this movie was made in the blockbuster era. Like the store blockbuster. I feel like this is the exact kind of movie where I can picture what the VHS cover looks like, and they position it so it's like some lonely dude on a lonely Friday night, just like, oh, hey, this probably has some boobs in it, and just picks it up.
It's funny you say that, because to me, I think this movie is probably watched by more women than men.
That's fair.
I think erotic thrillers in general skew more feminine, and well, yes, there's eroticism in it, and maybe that does like pull some guys in, right? By and large, I feel like true crime appeals to so many women that I think erotic thrillers, in the times before we had like 24 hours a day true crime channels and true crime podcasts, I think that erotic thrillers, I think it was mostly middle-aged women who were lapping this stuff up.
That's entirely fair. I will freely admit that I was not aware of the interests of middle-aged women when I was -1 year old. So
yeah, I'm not claiming to know the interests of middle-aged women now in my mid-30s, but you know, I don't know. I've always got the impression that like that's, at least based on who I've met, who I know, it just seems like that's where this type of movie skews more towards. I mean, you could be right, but like, I guess like...
No. I think that makes more sense, especially with a title like Single White Female, because then it would be the idea of like, oh, hey, it's me. There it is.
I can relate to this character.
Yeah. Look at that. Just looking through the writers, obviously it's based off a book, but the screenwriter apparently just did a lot of these kinds of movies. A lot of.
I mean, to be fair, so I was looking at the director, and didn't really know his name, didn't really recognize anything else he's done. But here's some titles that he's also directed, and just see if these sound like they're in a similar kind of genre here. Kiss of Death, Desperate Measures, Our Lady of the Assassins, and Murder by Numbers.
That one could be different, but I'm betting it's the same.
It definitely has kind of a wheelhouse that he seems to be operating. So
yeah, well, that was the one I wanted to bring up from the screenplay writer was apparently he also did the modern adaptation of Diabolique, starring Sharon Stone.
Oh, really? Okay.
So that's where we're at.
Yeah. I bet that is more of an erotic thriller, that remake. I bet they've got a couple of sexy scenes just to sort of justify having Sharon Stone in it.
Well, here's the thing I learned. If I go down to the tags on IMDb, they literally cannot restrain themselves from listing the nudity in the tags. So, sex on a dresser. There you go.
Yeah. I love the original Diabolique. We did it on the Criterion show, and I don't recall a sex scene on a dresser in that movie.
Nope. And further down here, it's in alphabetical order, so there is also female full frontal nudity, female rear nudity, and female star appears nude. So, you're welcome for that one.
That makes me sad that they remade Diabolique and shoved full frontal nudity in it just to spice it up.
It just reminds me, like, I'm sure there were other differences to it, but it reminded me of the shot-for-shot remake of Psycho, where, like, the only thing they changed was having Vince Vaughn jack off at some point.
Yes. I mean, it didn't cut to a shot of it, thankfully, but yes, there's a... I think the excuse at the time was like, well, that's probably what they intended, but they couldn't get away with actually implying it in the original film.
Okay, guys.
Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, so as far as like the rest of the cast go, there's not a huge cast of like notable characters, but we do have the fiancé character played by Steven Weber, who's just one of those guys I've seen in half a dozen things.
I swear to God, I thought I was confusing him for like Hugh Grant halfway through this movie. They just all look the same to me.
Oh, no. There is one person who he kind of reminds me of, and that is William Fichtner. I think they have a very similar kind of vibe and haircut, but I've definitely seen Steven Weber and stuff.
That's fair. I feel like Fichtner stands out more to me, but I get where you're coming from, especially younger ages. Yeah.
Fichtner definitely does stand out more. Like, I've definitely seen him in more stuff, but Weber's always felt like, oh, he's like the supermarket's own brand version of Fichtner. Not that he's bad by any means, he's just...
Oh, yeah. I gotcha. Oh, something that we were not made aware of beforehand is apparently if you're doing 90s erotic thriller month, you're also doing Steven Tobolowsky month.
To be fair, we don't know if he pops up in any more.
I'm going to assume he's in all of them.
Nah, I don't think so. I mean, maybe we'll be surprised next week, but no, it seems like it's just a coincidence that we got two back to back. They both came out in the same year. He's in a very different role in this one compared to Basic Instinct, though, to be fair.
Yes. Absolutely.
So there's that. Do you know what's funny is that Frances Bay is listed here as elderly neighbor, and I know her face. I've seen her in other movies. I don't remember when she popped up in this.
Not at all.
I'm like, when was there a woman neighbor?
Elderly neighbor? Because there was one neighbor that like popped his head out of the door, but that was definitely a dude.
Yeah, that was a guy. He had like a violin or something. Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah, and I love that the next like 5 or 6 names are all just the different people who apply for the apartment for the roommate position.
At that point, it's the in order of appearance for the rest of the cast. And
what I love about this is that I actually did recognize a couple of these. Renee Estevez is like the sort of nice one towards the end, and I've definitely seen her in 1 or 2 things. I think I might have seen Jessica Lundy in something because her face looked familiar. But what I love about these IMDb photos is that you've got them right. Well, one doesn't have one. 3 of them do. And then there's one who's got a photograph in a bikini, and it's like this exotic pose on a beach.
Yeah.
And then literally the credit for the movie is exotic applicant.
She knows her type very well.
And then you got mannish applicant, you got talkative applicant, perfect applicant, that's the Renee Estevez one. And then there you go.
This is just the worst version of the Spice Girls.
manage space, talkative space, exotic
spice. That one works.
Perfect space also works. I feel like mannish and talkative sound like really bad though.
Perfect spice just makes me think that like they all fuse together, and it's like, this is my final form. Perfect spice.
I'm just imagining the Space Girls now, like Voltron, just like, you know, like sporty and gingerly arms, scary and posh with the legs, and then who's left?
Scary. I don't know.
Ginger.
Scary,
Baby.
posh.
Baby's left.
Baby, that's right.
So Baby's the head. Baby's like the torso and head, and she's just stomping down there. Like,
someone get on it. Make that an anime.
Oh dear. So yeah, not a lot of other names to really mention, but I wanted to mention all the applicants. Because
I'd say there's only one more. I wouldn't even consider him like a B character. He's kind of bordering on C, but there is a upstairs neighbor named Graham.
Oh, did I skip him? I thought I'd already mentioned. That's why. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. No, I jumped down to Steven Tobolowsky too early.
Oh, that was your fault. That's fine. Okay. Yep. All right, we're moving on. All right, so yeah, Graham's the upstairs neighbor who is a gay guy that Alison's friends with, right? And that's a thing. So, yeah, I mean, as far as anything else goes, it's got a very kind of muted cinematic style, which I'm not complaining about. I actually think it's kind of reserved, and it's not a bad thing that it's reserved. You know, I'm not against that. As opposed to
every once in a while, they do like a very artsy shot. Like there's one very early on where our main character is like laying on the bed, staring up at the ceiling fan. It's a very pointed, like angled thing. They specifically chose the angle, but most everything just feels economic. Yeah,
there's a moment later on as well where like the main character's in the foreground in complete silhouette as the other characters in the background talking to him. Yeah, there's definitely sort of like nice little moments where they've done some effort and stuff, but I just mean it's not as constantly flashy in the same way that like Basic Instinct feels like it's constantly trying to feel more like sort of like modern cinematic. This feels like, again, it's harkening back to maybe a slightly older school of thriller, for better or worse. And I don't even think it, you know, there's a negative to that. And all my problems with this are more script and maybe to an extent direction and the actors, but mostly script. So,
I would be curious. This does seem like the kind of story that would be better off as a book, where you're able to more get into the like internal monologues and psyches of character. I think that would allow that sort of depth that you and I are both looking for here in both the characters, honestly.
Yeah, I think, Joe, thinking about it, and maybe this has been done, I can't think of an example, but I do wonder if the movie would be better if Hedy was actually the protagonist. Like, she's still she's still who she is, but we're viewing it more through, we're watching her like set things up and like try to do things.
Like the Bateman style. The Patrick Bateman style.
And I was thinking bizarrely, obviously it's very different, but I was thinking more like, you know, following Walter White in Breaking Bad. You're not necessarily following the hero, but more you're following kind of how they're doing things and ups and downs, and it can be more of a psychological character study of the character who is broken, the one who's going to do dangerous things. I think following it from the victim, for, you know, I guess lack of a better word, is a bit more generic, I guess, first up, but it also means that we're kind of juggling this act where we're not seeing the other side of things, but yeah, it feels predictable at the same time, so it's kind of unsatisfying. I don't know, there's like
I mean, I don't know if I agree that we don't see the other side of things, because that's what I feel like is part of this movie's downfall, is we see so much of what Hedy does throughout this movie that it doesn't feel like there's anything that's up for questioning. I feel like if they cut back on her stuff significantly, then at least I'd have a question of, well, is she doing all these things?
I think it's in the middle, because you are saying you've seen too much, and you are, from the extent, if we're following it from the main character's perspective, then we are seeing too much, perhaps. But I think if you actually are focusing it from her perspective, and you're seeing every little machination of how she's like hearing things and changing plans according to what she's overheard, or like seeing how she reacts to certain things. If it was more focused on that, and I actually felt like I was getting into her head, and I could enjoy kind of the build up to, this is going to make her snap, or this is going to make her do that, or whatever. Instead, it's kind of dancing between the two a little bit too much, I think. And I think if it had picked a lane in either side, I think I might have like got into it as, I'm following the main character, and the other one feels like an off-screen menace who pops in occasionally, but we never really know what she's up to, and that's kind of what's scary about her. or we follow it from the scary one, and it's more kind of like a psychological thriller about her sort of snapping and losing control and like whatever throughout kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would be okay with the latter, but I think that is a rarity of being able to make that really work well and not having it fall into sort of like, I don't know, just, you know, a serial killer sort of like slasher kind of movie.
I mean, obviously, yeah, you have to do it well. I'm just posing like some of the things that could fix the mundanity of the middle of this movie.
I think for me, what I was really looking for was, it's kind of a shame that we've had Basic Instinct first, is because there are so many little changes that could have been done to make this fall more in line, and I think improve the movie in just making us question whether or not Hetty is actually doing these things. Like, we see from the audience perspective, Hetty is absolutely responsible for like everything going on here, but the characters don't get it until much, much later in the movie, and it eventually becomes a problem of, well, why aren't they getting it? Like, this needs to be something that either is a question for both the characters and the audience, or they get it a lot earlier on, and then we just have to wait until they have like either proof, or the plot basically breaks under how much tension there is.
I mean, possibly, but that goes back to what I was just saying. Like, it's okay for the main characters or the other characters not to know that she's up to stuff if we're always seeing it from her perspective, and we're always seeing her getting away with these things, and the tension is like, will she get caught? Will they see her sneaking in and, I don't know, trying on some of her clothes or something, or sneaking in and doing various things? Like, you know, I like, not only have we recently done movies where I can compare specific things to, both in Basic Instinct, but even an upcoming Criterion episode, or well, it was not upcoming by the time this goes out, actually, but there was like an element of someone like sneaking around and like trying on clothes that belong to someone else, and the possible tension it can come from like almost being caught. I actually just did Ripley, a Netflix show, and some of that's in there where it's all about this, you know, talented Mr. Ripley, the book, and there's been previous movies and stuff, but I watched the Netflix show, and it's about someone sort of slowly trying to like get close to this guy and then take over his life and identity, and kind of like, and that follows Ripley the entire time, where it's like, okay, all the ways he's trying to like pull this off, all the little things he's doing, and I think in that context, the tension would come more from, is she going to get caught? When are the other characters going to realize she's up to something? And so I'm not saying that's the only way you could do this. I'm just saying that is an alternative to whatever this is in the middle, where it's not really picked one side or the other. You kind of have to treat it as like, we only know which one side that we're following is doing the whole time, and then you do eventually find out what the other side's up to. You sort of suspect it, you theorize, you tease, but here it sort of juggles both a little bit, where you see little moments where Hetty's making choices and doing things, but we're still not following her primarily. We're still following Allison primarily,
right? And
seeing like how her life progresses. I mean, I'm not going to say that it needs to do the whole thing where we have to question if she is or isn't doing it, because at a certain point that is just not what the story was trying to do, and that's fine. You know, Basic Instinct was very much that. Basic Instinct was, is she the killer or isn't she? That's what that movie was doing. This is saying, no, she definitely is the person that you think she is. It's just a case of, like, you know, when is she going to do things? Like, what's it going to build to? But I think both options of, like, focusing on one character more than the other would have helped considerably.
Yeah.
Whether it's you're following more Allison and leaving more of what Hetty's up to as a mystery for a certain portion of the movie, or you flip it and follow Hetty and have it be, no, we're following the bad character get around and do things with the others not knowing about it for a long stretch of time. I think both could be compelling, but what we have here is a little bit of both, and it makes certain things just kind of feel, like you say, you feel frustrated because the movie spelled out to us that she's doing certain things and the characters are just not, you know, getting it until halfway through the movie or whenever it is that finally starts to click.
I mean, that's kind of the other thing for me, is it's not even like it's halfway through the movie. They know that there's some stuff wrong very early on, and it's just kind of this slow burn until finally it like tips this imaginary scale in their head where it's like, okay, now it's gone too far. But like, I think for any other reasonable person, that should have happened at least 40 minutes earlier in the movie.
Yeah. As far as anything else goes, I don't know if I've got much else until we just start going into the spoilers.
Yeah, I will say something that, this movie takes place pretty much all in one apartment. There is the other aspects of the building that we get a walk through as well. I think it does a good job of, at the beginning of the movie, setting up the geography of it. So by the time that we hit the end of the movie, we get a good idea of all the different pieces that are coming into play. That being said, I think the initial walkthrough of the building is like, here's the Chekhov's gun. Please don't touch it until we hit the third act. And then it just continues on.
Yeah, you always complain about this when they set things up with this, and I
don't mind if they set it up in a way that feels natural, but they do it where like they literally pause everything and say, by the way, here's this thing. But anyway,
no, I'm going to defend this. It makes sense in the context of you're moving into this building. You need to do this sometimes to get the elevator to work. Like, that's fine.
All right, the moment it happened, I was like, well, there's the third act weapon.
Yeah, you've complained about this before, and I think you're being too sensitive to it. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with something being an obvious Chekhov's gun. Part of the fun is like, oh, how's that going to come into it later? Especially in a thriller, because you know it's going to come up in some way. It's going to be used as a weapon, probably. So.
Oh, absolutely. That was my problem with it. Like, it's one thing if they bring it up, but I have no idea how it's going to work out. If I'm like sitting there like, oh, is it going to be used for this, that, the other thing? But like this moment that this one came up, I'm like, okay, I know exactly how that's going to be used in the plot. And so now I'm just waiting for it.
Yeah, I just disagree that this is a problem. I think that's perfectly fine. It's no. I think just to clarify though, this is not a bottle movie. There are scenes elsewhere. There's scenes in hotel rooms. There's scenes out in the street.
On the street. Yeah,
they go to a salon at one point. There's like a nightclub that we'll talk about. Like there is
nightclub came out of nowhere.
But there is, it's like, but you're right, it is primarily in the one apartment building. It's just, but it's not like, it's not like this thing where they're doing like a gimmick where we're never leaving the building kind of thing.
Yep. I will say this is also a movie that specifically exists in the time period it does, because there is a major plot thing that happens specifically because they're using dial-up internet and someone is trying to call them and they can't get through because the internet is connected. That is no longer a problem. There's no way to make that a problem. So it is very specific to this period of time.
Yeah, honestly, that was kind of like, I don't think I've ever really thought about the fact that some people were using internet like this in 1992, because I always think of internet as not really being more of even dial-up internet, I don't really think of being a more normal thing until like, I don't know, 96, 97, somewhere in there. But clearly it was a thing. It's here in this movie. They're talking about it, they're using it. The thing that actually made me more like, oh, this is definitely the 90s, is at one point when someone says, oh, 37 and 38 are the movie channels. And I remember a time when like cable had 2 movie channels. Like I remember those days. So also the TVs in this movie are tiny. Like you see a TV sitting on top of a VCR and it's actually not as wide as the VCR. I'm like, okay, I get it, TVs were smaller, but this thing is tiny. This is ridiculous.
Well, I think that might also be the idea of the VCR also being bulkier back then. Like you have a modern idea of how big a VCR is, but they had to fit in like a lot more tech until they could slim it down more.
No, because like I've not had a VCR since like the year like 2000. Like they were all pretty similar sized.
Yeah, in 2000. This was almost a decade earlier. This sizing would have been bigger.
No, it looked like a normal sized VCR.
All right, fair. I mean, don't get me wrong. The TVs are small. I'm not saying that they're not, but the VCRs are also bigger.
They're not that much bigger. The VCRs in 1992 and then the year 2000 were not that much of a difference. And keep in mind, my first VCR would have been from this era, because I had one from like the age of 4, which is like a year after this. So it was probably bought around the same time as this piece of shit.
I've just seen some ancient tech floating around some relatives' houses, and I've seen pretty damn big VCRs.
Oh yeah, if you're talking about top loaders, fine. But this looked like every VCR I've ever seen in my life. This looked like exactly one of them.
Fair enough. To be fair, I was paying more attention to the TV than I was the VCR, but I did take note of it.
Yeah. Well, it couldn't have been a top loader because it was the TV, as mentioned, was sitting on top of it.
We've cracked it, Watson. Good job.
So but it stuck out to me. Also, we see multiple TVs and they're all Sony TVs, which just made me laugh because it's a Columbia movie, which is owned by Sony. Like very sly.
Yeah. I was waiting for the Walkman to come in. There had to be a Walkman at some point.
Also, as someone who has spent a lot of time researching TVs the last couple of months, because I'm getting a new TV in the nearish future, Like Sony TVs like have this tax on them. They're just like for the same quality of TV for another brand, a Sony TV is at least a couple of hundred more expensive. It just always seems to be the case. They price themselves as the premium, as the you know, the prestige brand.
If you break it down by like pieces, it's all the same price right up until you hit this one line on the invoice that says making up for Madam Web. And there's a $200 price on that.
Well, no, but I was thinking that even these tiny TVs in 1992, I bet they cost like 20% more than the Panasonic and like, you know,
probably
whatever ones. I don't think Samsung was a thing in 1992, or at least not in the US, but I feel like probably JVC. JVC used to be a big company doing electronics. What happened to them? They just disappeared.
I'm sure they were bought out by probably Sony and then just destroyed.
Yeah, I don't know. Or Toshiba. Toshiba used to be a thing.
This is now about the 90s. Let's just talk about that for a while.
Yeah.
Apparently, JVC went defunct in 2011, and they just went bankrupt, and all their stuff was bought out.
That was a bit later than I thought, actually. I guess they were just sort of, you know, trudging along, dying slowly for a decade.
Yeah, pretty much. Let's see here, 2001. Manufactures original audio equipment. Yeah, nah, they're just gone.
All right. What can one say? Hold on. I'm curious.
Which one now?
Right. I just googled TV brands from the 90s. Mm-hmm. So there was Sony, there was Philips, there was Panasonic, Mitsubishi, which I guess I think I've seen that, but obviously I associate it with a car more than I do a TV.
Yeah, they pivoted.
And then apparently there was a Japanese brand called Hitachi. That word has been taken by another device at this point, I think.
Boy, I really could use a good TV to watch some porn on. Well, have I got the deal for you?
Casio. Okay.
Yeah,
that was a thing.
Casio.
Yeah, they go for a long time. All right.
I think they still make watches. That's about all they got.
All right. You know what? They know their lane. Like Yamaha make keyboards, and they make like,
and motorcycles.
Yes, they know their lanes, and they stay.
That's
in
a very specific lane.
All right, let's get into spoilers for Single White Female.
Yes.
The movie begins with a couple making love. Actually, I think they're already just lying around rather than they have sex at the end of the scene, I think.
Yeah. There's also a little interstitial scene of two twins.
I forgot about this. Yeah, there's a creepy little like hint of a backstory. And I genuinely thought that the movie was going to try and pull a twist at the start of the film. I thought, is the twist going to be, we think, you know, the roommate is the crazy one, but it turns out that the main character used to have a twin and he's evil. Like, that was like, that was in my head for the first like 5 minutes of the movie. But then obviously the more we actually saw of Jennifer Jason Leigh's character, the more I'm like, nah, she's just the crazy one.
She's definitely the one we're gonna have problems with as we move on here.
Dear. Yeah, so it sets up our couple here, Alice and Sam, are in love. They're talking about their wedding and whatever.
They literally just like, I don't need anybody but you. You're the only person that I need at the wedding. We're so in love. Everything's great. And then like, I don't know what divine karmic god they pissed off, but dear Lord, did they piss off this god of coincidence real hard.
Is this how you proposed? Did you like, we can have a scuba diving wedding? We can...
Yeah. That's we're still planning the wedding out. We're still trying to figure out whether or not we want to do it on the rim of a volcano or naked skydiving. Yeah.
Get married
also naked.
Bell. Also naked, yes. Naked Taco Bell wedding.
It's going to be a good time. Live Moss.
Yeah, so basically, Sam's ex-wife calls, expecting to find him there, and he's like, no, I don't want to talk to her. Like, how dare she phone us late at night, blah, 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 blah. And
let the machine get it.
Yeah. Allison's like, no, you're already awake. You might as well talk to her. But because it's playing through like the other receiver as well, when she like leaves him alone.
It's playing the answering machine.
Is it the answering machine?
Yeah. They let it go to the machine, and then he picks up as she starts talking on that.
Oh, I thought she left the room because he was going to take the call, but yeah, fair enough. But regardless, she starts saying, you can't just come over here in the afternoon and sleep with me like nothing's happened. And like, obviously this breaks down the whole relationship. Allison's upset. He's like, I didn't intend to sleep with her when I went over to see her today. He's like, oh, that makes me feel much better. But yeah, so that's our genesis for why she needs a roommate. She needs someone to live with her.
And during this sequence, we also see who we find out to be Graham, the upstairs neighbor, is listening through a vent and can hear everything. And I thought for sure this was going to be like the creepy thing that like sets off the plot, not knowing that Jennifer Jason Leigh was even in the movie because I didn't check the cast until later.
Yeah, this was... Obviously, it's setting up a mechanic for later, right? And it is used in a small way, but it wasn't used later. This idea that you can like hear conversations like from one apartment to the other through this vent, I thought it was going to be such a big plot mechanic later on, and it was like something that maybe the villain was going to use repeatedly, and it just isn't. It's like one time she overhears a conversation, and that's it.
I thought for sure there was going to be something where like, you know, Jennifer Jason Leigh hits on Sam. I guess I should say Hetty. Hetty hits on Sam, and like they get caught in the middle of it, and then it's only the neighbor who comes out later and says like, no, I heard the whole thing. She was the one laying down the moves.
Yeah, I thought that as well, that in some way it was going to actually be what convinces probably the main character, but whoever needs to be convinced that who's really the villain here, that someone hearing something to the vent would be the proof they need to like know that, like, you know, who's responsible kind of thing. But it never became that big of a deal. It felt kind of underutilized in the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got that. But it turns out he's good friends with her. She doesn't know that he can hear her. He kind of reveals that later, sort of like, oh yeah, by the way, these vents are kind of weird. Sometimes I hear you at your apartment. And she's like, what do you hear? And she gets all embarrassed because it's clearly sex sounds.
I was going to say, there's this sheepish smile between them, and he's just like, oh, I'm so sorry. And he's like, don't worry about it, hon.
But yeah, so we get the montage of like the different applicants. We also get the fact that her job, like her professional life here, she's starting off kind of a new business. It seems like she had a partner, and this is why I thought it was going to be like some reveal that she was like with her twin sister doing this like partnership or something. Turns out we never even get to meet this partner she used to have. It's just backstory. That's all it is.
Yeah, she meets with Steven Tobolowsky to try to like convince him to use her software or whatever, and then she's going to be like educating on it. And she gives a pitch for her price and says like, this is about how much. And he goes over and he like scribbles it out, and he's like, actually, I want this much cheaper amount because I called your partner and I heard about this whole backstory of how like this whole thing happened between you two. And she gets all, scared about it. She's like, no, it wasn't that big of a thing. Like, I wouldn't trust her at all. And it feels like it's going to be this whole thing that comes back, but just no, it's just to make it out so Steven Tobolowsky is a dick. That's the only reason this whole thing exists.
Well, it's not just that. It sets up a couple other things. It sets up that in the lawsuit, when they parted ways, and because our main character, Allison, turned out to be the one in the right, she got to keep all the software developed, all the tech they had for that software. She also got a rent-controlled apartment out of it, which is kind of a plot point as well. It's kind of why she, one, can't just leave because it's such a good deal in New York. Because I was actually thinking in the opening scene, this is a really big, spacious apartment in New York. Like, this must cost a fortune. And well, it's probably still expensive. Finding out that she got a settlement deal and a lawsuit, I'm like, okay, that at least kind of like partially explains it at least. Yeah. So fair enough. That's why you've got such a nice big place. She's not really filled it with much yet, admittedly. The bed's basically just on the floor, but...
Yeah, but I mean, they also say that she only just recently came to New York. She doesn't have any friends here, so it makes sense.
Yes, except Graham upstairs, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but he's basically like, look, I know about this backstory. I know you just moved here, and you've got a rent-controlled apartment, so... I want this cheap price, but what you'll get from me is that I'll put, like, once you've done a good job for me, I will set you up with other colleagues, and it'll, like, network you, and you'll get a much better price out of them once you've established yourself.
Steven Tobolowsky is literally saying, I will pay you in exposure.
Oh, he definitely wants some exposure.
Oh, yes.
More on that later. Yes. So, okay, you've got that. She's taken this job. She's actually quite optimistic about it, despite getting much less money than she expected, because she does see it as an opportunity to hopefully start her brand and kind of get her name out there, kind of thing. And she puts out the ad for for the roommate. She sees these applicants. We get a montage of these different characters coming in and just being, weird, different.
Yeah, we get all these weird ones. To be fair, the exotic applicant, I have no idea what was wrong with that one. Like, did I just miss something as she was walking through? She's just like smiling.
So I think the implication is that because she was just looking and not saying anything, is that she was being judgy and like snooty about things. Whereas the one that comes after, the Estevez actress, like she was like too sweet and nice.
Yeah,
it was kind of like her thing. It's like, oh, she's too sweet.
I don't think she was too sweet, because the very next sequence, as soon as she passes, we see Allison go over to the phone, and it seems like she's about to call her and say like, hey, you've got the apartment if you want it. But then she gets distracted because she sees Sam's picture on the fridge, and then she has a little emotional breakdown.
But I still think that was the point, though. I think she was the best choice, because too sweet's better than all the other options that were actively like aggressive, stuck up or kind of cookie or whatever the other. Like, actually, one of the girls, this is the one that actually got.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the ladies will just walk, like she's introduced by just walking past the camera, and like the first line of dialogue she says, and this is very casual and off the cuff, and not like she's given a dark backstory. She just sort of says it like she's, I'm just whining about the weather kind of like tone. She's like, yeah, I'm an incest survivor. Like, I don't really remember it, but I know I survived something. My therapist thinks so.
I haven't recalled it yet, but I'm sure it must have happened. All of my therapists say that I must have survived something in my past.
I'm like, okay, I hope that's not like a foreshadowing thing. Luckily, it's not, but like, I was concerned about that. But I think that's like, okay, this girl's a bit too sweet, but she's the best of the bunch. And you're right. She goes over to say, I'll phone her, but then she sees a photo of Sam, and she breaks down. And that's when, at her most vulnerable, in walks Hedy and says, are you okay? And then ends up helping her when she tries to get her some water from the sink. And the pipe burst, and she knows how to turn off the pipe valve. And it's like, oh my God, we're made for each other. You actually know how to fix things.
It's even more than that, though. Like, obviously it doesn't go that far, but like immediately they're drenched in water, and the next shot is them with their clothes hanging up to dry. I'm like, wow, that escalated extremely quickly.
I mean, it's all like pleasant enough. It's all like, she's not acting weird yet. She's being nice about everything.
Yeah, and she's like, clearly very like bashful and introverted. Like, she's very much trying to stay reserved, but she is kind enough to Allison.
And this is enough to sort of make her kind of like go, okay, you know what? You can move in. And we get like a whole montage of them moving stuff around and like dropping things off a table. It's very light and very jovial and all the rest of it. And
we also get the specifics set up here of try to not let anybody know you live here, because it is rent controlled and your name can't be on the lease. So you kind of just need to be here in secret. And she's like, yeah, no problem. Can do.
Yeah, it turns out that was a bad idea for reasons we'll get to later. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole montage of like them bonding, of her being like, hey, let's go out and get you some clothes, and like taking her out, and she's like, no, you've got so much more style than I do, right? That's that's Hedy saying that. And she's like, oh, let's go out and get some stuff, we'll buy you some clothes and whatnot, you look like a New Yorker, blah blah blah. And one of the actual bits of foreshadowing for later, which I think is actually done kind of well, is oh, I like these shoes, no, you like them too, you take them, I'll just borrow them when I need them. Because that ends up being a murder weapon later, which given that later on it's like, hey, they're all going to think you killed these people, not me. The fact that it all comes from this shoe line of like, no, I'll just borrow it when I need it, and then that turns out to be a murder weapon. I actually do think that's a neat little setup and payoff.
That's the kind. Okay, I know you got pissed at me, but that's the kind of setup and payoff, the Chekhov's gun stuff that I like. Like this idea that they mentioned the shoes before, and then when it comes time later on, they pay back off that line. That's a good idea of what I'm looking for there.
I think the other way's fine.
Okay. I'm not
the
arguing
other way's
that
fine.
Your preference is noted, but my preference is as well.
I just don't think it's like a negative. It's perfectly fine. Like, I if you're going to like have a big neon light saying this is a Chekhov's gun, I'm okay with that as long as you pay it off. As long as you pay it off and give me the satisfying... Especially when I'm watching something that's a little trashy, and this is a little trashy, like I'm okay with it not adhering to like a more subtle approach.
I was actually just thinking about this earlier, like before I even started watching the movie, is how, like, when we're talking about the movies, do I judge it all on the same scale of like what I want a good movie to be? Or if something is trashy or something is just supposed to be stupid, do I judge it on that level of what it wanted to be to begin with?
That's a tough question that people always debate on, like how
Yeah.
to like praise or rate things, and ultimately, I think there is some sliding scale, but there's also limits to that sliding scale. But I will say, if it's working and is effective in what it's trying to do, then you should give it some cred for that. I don't think this is completely effective though, which is why
Right,
I
right.
think it's middling. And well, but
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, they're bonded a little bit. They're watching movies together. Not this scene. There's a scene later on though where Hetty's watching Vertigo, and I laughed because part of the plot of Vertigo is someone being dressed, like a woman being dressed like another woman, which obviously comes up in this plot. But I also laughed more so because James Wynn, who directed Birdemic, did a movie that was a straight up just like if Birdemic is his The Birds, he did another movie which title I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but it was just his version of Vertigo.
Okay.
I just this made me it made me think of that. So,
Just anytime you see Vertigo, you're like, but James Wynn's version.
no, it was specifically the fact that they were referencing because that movie also makes references to Vertigo and then does just the Vertigo plot. The fact that this was referencing Vertigo so it could go on and do something that sort of harkens back to Vertigo made me think of James Wynn.
Gotcha. Was he director of that?
Yes.
I see two movies that aren't Birdemic here. Replica and Julian Jack.
There's Replica.
All right.
Julian Jack says, do I call it a Matrix-like?
That's scary to hear.
Don't worry, these are future X Reels episodes, David.
Oh, good.
You can look forward to these.
Good.
Although, the weird thing about Replica is that it never officially got released, so you have to watch it with Riff Tracks, because Riff Tracks got their hands on it, so they could put out the movie, but you can only watch it with their commentary.
Interesting.
Which isn't a bad thing in the sense that you at least get some good jokes as you're watching the movie, but you can't watch it vanilla.
Okay, fair enough. I'll see when we get there. We got at least a couple months.
Yeah, well, we have to get our first Uwe Boll film under us before we get to James Wynn.
God, you make me question whether I want to answer Skype every time you open your mouth.
We've got more Neil Breen to do. There's so many auteurs in the shit film.
So as they are bonding, we get our first little nudity for the sake of nudity. There's literally like barely any reason for it to be here except to show how comfortable Hetty has gotten around Allison this quickly.
Oh yeah, she's out of the shower and she just because Allison's bought her a lampshade and she's putting it in her room, and when she's in there she starts looking at her jewelry, and it's kind of like was I overstepping by being kind of nosy whilst I was in here? But she kind of plays it off. But then Hetty just sort of takes off her shower gown and puts on whatever she's wearing to bed.
She's like, now who's uncomfortable, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's whatever. I honestly, this like next chunk of the movie mostly is blurring in like one faint haze, so we'll just sort of recap it in a sort of summary way rather than like in order.
Yeah, so immediately afterwards, the big thing though is that Sam calls, and Hetty has been made aware of the Sam situation and is specifically saying like, is there any chance you two are going to get back together? Because I don't want to lose this place. I don't want you to...
Well, even before this, she said that even when she offered her the roommate, right? When she saw the photo of Sam, she's like, oh, is there any chance you two will get back together? Because I don't want to have to move again in like a month because you two have rekindled. And she's like, no, that won't happen. So that's kind of her growing like agitation or fear, if you will, as this is going on. But Sam keeps trying to call, and they're refusing the call, whatever. And when he eventually shows up a little bit later, and he's just there already, he's there, and Hetty apologizes, but he's like, no, I basically forced my way in, don't blame her. He mentions that he sent a letter that had his copy of her keys in the letter, and also like a sort of love note, try to like want her back and whatever. And she's like, no, I didn't get the letter. It's like, okay, obviously Hetty got to the letter first, and took it, read it, kept it from her. is try to keep this on down low, whatever. Also during this time, Hetty gets a dog.
I love it because it's one of those things that it's so obviously just the thing of trying to endear and like force these two closer together as well. Because once there's a dog in the picture, you may as well have a kid. Like it's the sort of thing of what happens if we split? Who gets to keep the dog?
That's the thing, yeah. It's like it's like someone saying, "Hey, I'm pregnant," to try and keep a relationship together. This is her getting a dog, so it's there. And she's like, "Okay, you don't want the dog. I'll take it back tomorrow. I promise." But she intentionally sets it up so that the dog will have to be with Allison that night, so Allison will bond with it.
The dog just whines and cries, and Hetty pretends to sleep through it so that Allison has to wake up and let the dog into her room.
But then they bond, the dog's sitting in her lap as she's doing her work at the computer, and it's like, okay, you've made it happen. The dog's a thing now. It's our dog. Actually, before this scene, there's another scene with Graham, which isn't important from a plot perspective, but there's just a bit where he says, hey, I'm going to be out of town this weekend. Can you come like feed the cat while I'm away? And I immediately got worried. I was like, oh no, something bad's going to happen to this cat. It's that type of movie. And then,
I thought something did happen to the cat.
And then
until a certain point.
And then something, and then the dog was brought into the picture, and I went, oh, there's a dog now too. And then something does happen to the dog, and I thought, oh, is the cat off the hook because the dog got it? Oh, this is great. And then even when there was some doubt that maybe something did happen to the cat, no, it turns out the cat was fine. The cat survived and made it to the end.
9 lives. Which
is fine with me. But yes. So, yeah, basically, like, they start... during
the keys scene, during the scene where he comes in and says like, hey, I sent you a letter with all that, Hetty leaves to go to work, so she's out of the picture, and then she forgives him and they just have sex all day long.
Yeah, they go to a hotel though. They don't stay there. They leave to get
Was it a
privacy.
hotel? I thought it was his place.
No, it's a hotel, because it's the same hotel as later.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Because it's set up in payoff. Later on, when Hetty looks like her and she's leaving the place, the concierge says, bye, Miss Whoever, because he's used to her being there with him.
I just thought it was the concierge of like the apartment building. Some of those uppity ones have like doormans and stuff like that.
Oh, I mean, you might be right. Maybe it's an apartment building, not a hotel, but it's definitely the same building as later.
Right, yeah.
Because I think it's the way they kept saying room, like, whatever. I mean, it sounded like a hotel to me, but I mean, yeah, it could just be his place. But... no, I'm thinking about it, though, when I think of like the room from later, when she goes there, it does look more like a hotel room, because it's just like the door's there and then there's like a bed in that room.
Bed, that makes more sense. You're right.
So anyway, yeah, so yeah, they rekindle while she's at work, and you can tell that Hetty's worried about this because she's at work at like a bookstore and she's like trying to call home to like find out if anything's going on, and she's like, no, this can't be happening. Why are they rekindling? But when it cuts to the hotel and they're like the couple are going there and they're going in and they're all happy and they're clearly smiling and whatnot. At one point you can hear Allison say, oh, Hetty will understand, you know, she's a good roommate, she'll understand. And I'm like, I don't know, she specifically made you promise this wouldn't happen like just a few weeks ago. This feels like it's gone down a bad path.
I mean, don't get me wrong, Hetty is absolutely in the long run in the wrong for everything that happens in this movie. But this is the one time I'll say, like, nah, Allison, like, this is on you. You specifically made the point of saying that, like, this was not going to happen, and then it did.
Let's assume Hetty is a normal, level-headed human being. Any awkwardness or resentment that would come from the conversation where she says, oh, I'm getting back together with my fiancé, you either have to move out or we're going to leave and you're going to have to, like, find a roommate so you can afford this place. Any resentment or reaction she gives over that is justified, because she specifically said, I don't want to accept this roommate position if you're just going to get back with him in a month and I'm shit out of luck.
Plus, it didn't even feel like it was a month. It felt like it was like a week max.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm just saying that was... I think that's what she said in the scene.
Yeah,
she said
exactly.
in a
That's
month.
it. She says a month, and it's even less than that. It's significantly less than that.
Yeah, and... so this next portion where they're back together and he's still kind of spending time at the house, there's a couple of little moments that happen.
But yeah, before they even get to the point where he's back at the house, she comes back home after everything. It's like real late at night. She goes into her bedroom. Hetty flips on the light and just, where the hell were you? And I'm like, oh, okay, you should run now.
Yeah, like an angry parent, like, where have you been? Like, you didn't think it's New York, anything could have happened to you. I'm just worried. I care about you.
Yep.
But no, the couple of things that happen once he's sort of hanging out at the house, right? Because they're all kind of living there. I don't know if he's living there, but he's certainly there overnight a lot because of
Right.
the relationship. Is that there's just these little moments where, one, you can tell that Hetty is getting jealous and frustrated that Alison's attention's more on him than her.
Mhm.
But there's also a couple of little moments specifically where it feels like she's trying to provoke something in him. Now, whether or not it's because she wants like to prove that he's a scumbag and it'll like mean that Alison is hers, or whether or not it's because she wants to become Alison and take him for herself. Obviously, I think the rest of the movie spells it's more the former, but in the moment in the movie, I wasn't really sure like what path she was, going down.
Yeah, because of the earlier shopping scene and stuff like that, we also got the idea that like she's wearing similar clothes to Allison during this section as well. So there is this very slow transition of like starting to absorb her life. So when it comes time to, we get to see that Allison is even a little bit, I don't know if jealous is the right word, but suspicious at the very least.
She notices these little moments like, oh, she's making Sam breakfast and he's happy having this bacon and eggs, and she's feeling awkward and doesn't want to join in. Or the moment where when Hetty goes up to talk to him, and it's clearly like the couple have already clearly had sex this night because they're just kind of like lounging about in bed. And she comes to the door with a shirt and it's unbuttoned, so it's like you don't see anything, but it's kind of open and suggestive.
Yeah, and she's like giggling and stuff like that.
And it kind of feels like, oh, she's trying to like put seeds in his brain of like, hey, you're tempted, aren't you? Aren't you tempted? Come on. So there's these little moments.
And then add on top of it that night, just add a bit more to the sexualness of it, is she wakes up in the middle of the night and hears Hetty masturbating down the hall.
Well, she hears it, but then she actually walks down the hall and looks in from the distance and actually sees it. And it's like, oh, is she attracted to Sam? Is she planning on trying to steal him? And it is like, I mean, I think we could look back at that scene now and kind of debate what exactly is, like, getting her in the mood, I suppose, to put it that way. Like,
I mean, honestly, I feel like it was all intentional. Knowing how much Hetty was planning everything out, I feel like she was purposely being as loud as humanly possible in order to get Allison to know that is, whether she peeps or not, that's entirely separate, but at least she knows it's happening.
Yeah, or maybe alternatively, the plan may not have been for her to hear. Maybe the plan was for him to hear, and the hope is that he will hear it and be like, oh, a woman in pleasure? Oh.
My word. I can't wait to go over and ruin that.
But if it's all about like sort of drawing him in, I could see that it's a win-win for whoever hears it. Maybe it's both, even like. Yeah. But like, so you've got that moment, you've got these little moments, and you've also got like there's a moment where she's like, "Hey, I made breakfast. How about we all go out, to dinner tonight," kind of thing. And
I think she offers to like cook for them because they enjoyed the breakfast. She's like, yeah, well, I can make food for us at dinner too. Does that sound good? Us three together? And
Alison's like, no, it's like an anniversary tonight, so we're going to go out, eat out, and it's like, our soul's been crushed. I think this is what leads to the dog bit. There's definitely a bit before this where she's left alone on her own, and it's when she's watching Vertigo, and there's a moment where she like kicks the dog away. And you get this sense that the dog clearly doesn't like her very much because obviously Alison is nice to the dog and Hetty isn't. So there's this moment after the breakfast scene where they leave together to go do something, and Hetty is crouched down and kind of like almost crying over like what's happening, and the dog's over at the front door like sort of yelping and like scratching at the door wanting to follow Alison, and Hetty's like, come here, and the dog just doesn't even look at her, and it's like another rejection. It's like, oh, even this stupid dog likes Alison more.
It just keeps on building and building of like, come here buddy, come here, and then the dog doesn't come over and she's like, come here buddy. And then after it doesn't, she's like, fine, be that way. And that's where we get the part that I thought was going to be way later in the movie. But damn, they just got it out of the way early.
It goes to the couple talking about, okay, we have to like either move out or get rid of Hetty. Like, how do we do that? And Alison's like, oh, I can't just toss her out. I'm her only friend, blah, blah, blah. And she's been all sympathetic. But when they come back round the corner towards their building, they see the dead dog lying on the pavement, and they freak out and they run up, and Hetty's got like headphones on or something. She's just like minding her own business, and it's made to look an accident because earlier on Sam was fixing the sort of the safety railing outside the window, probably because the dog's there now and it's a bit more of a risk. Because, for a human being, one little hole's not a big deal, but for the dog, they might go through. Obviously, I'm pretty sure that she just threw him out the window. But
absolutely. But she even makes it seem like she tries to take the blame for it as well.
Yeah,
as a space saving measure, because she's like, oh, I'm the one who interrupted him fixing that for breakfast, so I'm the one to blame. I'm the reason the dog is dead. I'm so sorry, Allison. Can you ever forgive me?
So she's heartbroken, and then even later on that night, when she's still upset, Sam mentions, oh, that thing you gave her seems to have done the job of putting her down, which is important because then she's like late for work the next day as well. So it's like she's kind of like interfering with her life by giving her whatever she gave her. All right, here's a roofie. Go to bed.
Pretty much, yeah. Seems like it.
But he like comes across Hetty like crying in the kitchen, and he's like, "Oh, what's wrong?" It's like, "Oh," she's like, "Oh, it's all my fault." And he's like, "No, if anything, it's my fault. Like I was meant to be fixing it, and I messed up. It's fine." And she just bawls and throws herself into his arms and like starts crying into his neck. And he's like, "Oh, so here, there, it's okay." And he never does anything wrong. He completely is just like sympathetic, and he's like walking her back to her room. But of course, as they get to the room, she tries to like go in for a kiss. Like she starts like sort of like going towards his mouth, and he, to be fair to him, and he's saying that he made a mistake with the ex-wife, and like he doesn't want to cheat on Alison. He pulls away and says, "No, like you're upset. Just go into your room, and that's it."
It's like the longest goodbye too. Like as he's trying to leave the room, her hand is like stuck on his shoulder, and then he tries to close the door, and it just like slowly goes down the arm until the door is just like, "Come on, let go."
I think what was getting me here in the movie is that I'm like, okay, are you going for this idea that she wants to become Allison, and she's frustrated that Allison's fiance is not attracted to her? Is that making her mad? Is that making her jealous and rejected? And I thought that's what the movie was going down that path. And obviously, but by the time it gets like where it's going later, I'm like, no. And actually, Ali, I'm not sure if that was. At least it didn't stick to that. If that's what it was wanting me to think at the time, because it kind of goes in other places. But
the bit that I was thinking at this point was that she wanted to become Allison. So I did think it was trying to be like a seduction thing of basically trying to take away the fiance and try to like seduce to that side. The place where I pivoted is probably about like 10-15 minutes later, where we find out Hetty's deep dark secrets of the past, and among other things, we know that she had a twin. And at that point I was like, oh, okay, she's trying to get a new like sister, someone who is that close, like a twin, and anybody who's interfering with that, aka the fiance who she would have had to move out with, those people she's just trying to get out of Allison's life.
Yeah, she's just trying to ruin everything. But at this point, it is kind of like she's trying to be her, but is she going to resent her because everyone is going to reject her? It's like, no, you're not Allison. I'm here for Allison, and you're not her. Because the one thing that kind of comes up as well is that, oh, do you know identical twins? Like, they're not actually identical. One is the prettier one, and the other one does all the work. And it's like, okay, you got a lot of resentment there. But to be fair, before we get to that point, there is other stuff that does heavily suggest she wants to be Allison, because it's not too long after this that we get her doing her makeover, where she gets the same haircut and hair color, and and it actually becomes like an issue where if you can't see the face well, you actually do struggle to see which one you're looking at, because it's the exact same haircut and color. So from the back they look identical, and that becomes the thing. Before it gets to that though, that's like a rebonding thing, because something else tragic kind of happens to Allison, where Hetty becomes the protector, where she's the strong one who's able to like be angry on the phone and threaten him and all that. And I'm of course talking about the boss, played by Stephen Tobolowsky, who we mentioned earlier.
So during all the in-between, she's been going to the office and like teaching his crew how to use the software, because that's part of the deal. And they finally wrap that up. Like they're all completely done with the teaching. But Stephen Tobolowsky's like, well, now wait a minute. You taught everybody else but me. I want to know some stuff about software. Why don't you sit down with some champagne and show me how to do something?
Yeah, and it's that thing where like even his pose as she's sitting in the chair and he's hovering behind her is already a little bit like, where's this going? And sure enough, he like starts to like, massage her neck, saying, oh, your neck's so stiff, you need help. And then he starts kind of like holding her and kissing her neck. And he even says, it's not even like he's looking for anything long term. He just says, oh, this is your last chance to play before you're an old married woman.
And it's also implied that this entire thing, like, either she does this or he's not going to put in a good word with anybody else, which is, of course, the whole reason she was doing it.
So it's like, yeah, everything he promised is now completely jeopardized. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, we have a word for this now. It's Weinsteined. She's getting Weinsteined of like, hey, your career's not going to go anywhere if you don't do this. Yeah, and she's crying, she's struggling a little bit, and then she kind of like feigns like, oh, maybe I should turn around. And he's like, yeah, that's the spirit. And she turns around, and I swear, before she's even done the full 180 degrees on this chair, this man has dropped his trousers. Like, he's just like quickly just undone them and thrown them down. And like, he's like waiting for his oral sex. And of course, she doesn't do it. She hits him in the balls instead and makes a run for it. But this is where Hedy steps in, though, because she tells Hedy this, and Hedy's there for her and backs her up and even calls this guy and makes it clear that, hey, you won't spread this you won't like give her a bad reputation, you won't say a bad word about her, or I'll mess with your whole family. I mean, she kind of does that pretending to be her, though, which is an important detail, actually.
She picks up the phone and says like, oh yeah, this is Allison Jones, and then she's like, you're gonna say good things about me or I'm gonna come after your whole family. Click. Yeah,
which I guess is important in the context of her going to frame her later for anything she's done, so I guess that's also worth mentioning. But from the Allison perspective, though, it's like, no, she's there and she's strong and she stuck up for me and she was this protector when I needed, when I was down and I was hurt. Hedy was there. So it almost kind of like for any weird little moments she's had with her, it's like, you know what? She's kind of weird. She's, she has these little moments, but she's loyal. She stayed by my side and she was there for me. So it kind of re-strengthens the friendship for a little bit.
I would agree to an extent, but also the very next scene is the hairstyle scene where it feels like that undoes it immediately.
Oh, I know it does, but like I'm saying, that's why she was even in a position of like, hey, let's go and have a girl's day out and get her hair done. Like, she agreed to do that, I think, on the back of this like rekindling, like, okay, you know what, you're actually, you're kind of weird and whatever, but you're kind of there for me, so let's be friends.
You use my name to blackmail somebody, but we're friends.
But yeah, she comes down the stairs and she's got the exact same haircut and she's wearing just her clothes. And there's multiple points throughout this movie where Allison goes into her closet and notices stuff is missing and then finds it in Hedy's closet.
Well, it's not even that it's missing. Like, yes, her clothes are missing, but she also finds exact copies of it as well.
Yeah.
The ones that Hedy has bought for herself. And she's like, that's weird.
Yeah, and is it around here where she goes snooping for the shoebox with the stuff in it? Yeah.
The shoebox is literally smack dab in the middle of the movie. It's the turning point of like, all right, this is where stuff gets deeper.
Yeah, because Hedy says she's in for a shower and it's like, okay, I've got like 10 minutes to snoop. So she goes into the bedroom and gets this shoebox out of the closet, which she kind of knew to do because earlier on when she was in the bedroom, Hedy kind of made a point of like guarding it a little bit. So there was like, okay, that's the obvious place to go for some dirt. And sure enough, there's a bunch of newspaper clippings and like letters and stuff like that. Clearly, this Hedy's not a real name. It's like Ellen. She had a twin sister who died when she was 9 in a pool, and obviously the audience immediately goes, "Oh, she did that as a kid, probably."
Yeah.
Or maybe if she didn't, at the very least, it unlocks something in her. But there's definitely implications as the movie goes on that Allison's not the first potential replacement who's met a demise of some kind. Right. I think there's hints of like, something like this happened in Florida where she got attached to someone and it did not end well for that other person.
Yeah, definitely not.
So, she's getting checks from her parents to like sort of fund her, but the parents are like frustrated that she's not like talking to them or something.
Yeah, you don't get that yet. That's much later on, but yeah, we do find out that basically her job is obviously not enough to keep her completely afloat, so she has regular checks sent to her from her parents.
Yeah, I'm just rolling all the stuff we find out about her into like a ball, because there's not really much more to it. That's pretty much it.
Beyond that, I think the only other thing is that, like you said, there's this idea as to whether or not she's the one who caused her sister's death, but that's the one thing that's kind of left ambiguous, is she genuinely doesn't either remember or doesn't know, but she seems very sad about the fact that she lost her twin to some extent.
The only thing we know for sure is that her dad thinks that it wasn't her, because the dad says your sister's death wasn't your fault, but that makes me go, maybe it was, and you're just like justifying it as a parent.
even the final monologue in this movie kind of goes with that. It's playing this idea of like, no, all of this happened because she felt guilty and that she lost this part of her. But everything that's shown to us about the character, and especially her saying like, there's always one prettier twin and the other one does all the work, that feels like a lot of resentment that could have bubbled over into this murderous rage.
Yeah. My suspicion is just, like, it may not have been like a super intentional murder at 9 years old. It might have been more, oh, I'll push you into the water. Oh, you can't swim. That's a shame. I'll just stand here. As opposed to, I'm going to strangle the life out of you with my bare hands kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Hey, let's play chicken. First you go underwater, and then you stay underwater.
Let's play Only Child. How do we play that? You'll see.
Hey, I found out how I can get twice as many Christmas gifts. You want to find out?
So after all this shoebox revelations making her think, oh, Hetty's actually dangerous, whatever, she begins to do a little spy work. She begins to pay attention, keeps an eye on her, and actually follows her, tails her outside of the building to see where she goes, and follows her into a cab, actually gets another cab to say, hey, don't lose that cab. Look, she has something that belongs to me. Keep an eye on it.
I always love when movies do the like follow that cab to a cab driver, because I'm the part that always gets me is, how does the fare work out in the end? How do they stop and say like, that's $43.50, and they're just like, Jesus, okay, hold on, I've got 220s. Is that enough?
Yeah, I mean, I asked the cab driver doesn't really care. The meter's running as long as you pay for it. As opposed to they don't care that they're following someone, as suspicious as it might sound upon request. But yeah, so follows her to the stairwell, right, on the side of the street going down to somewhere. And when she goes in, it turns out to be a sex club. Where, like, because we go in and there's just like people walking about in latex. She goes past the door. We don't see exactly what the show is, but it sounds like people having sex, and there's a crowd just watching the sex. And this one woman, who again is dressed out in kind of semi-dominatrix style gear, comes over and is like, hey, do you want to play? And she's like, I'm okay, thanks. And it just kind of wanders off. And it almost like a horror movie where like someone's like in a room full of animal cages and they're standing too close to a cage. There's like a male dancer in like a cage who puts his hand out and touches the back of her neck or whatever, and she's like,
She's like, no, thank you, please.
And I'm like, okay. I was thinking in this moment, I'm like, okay, you've followed her here. She's into some kinky stuff. Is this going to be like a big part of where this is going? Does she have some kind of big fetish that involves a fake twin sister, whatever it might be? What are we doing here? And the one thing we see here, which kind of still further corroborates this idea of her wanting to become Allison, is that she's at the bar and she's talking to a guy who at first I thought was Sam. It's not. It's just a guy that's very similar to Sam. He's got the same kind of hair, same kind of build, but it's not him.
That's fair.
And I'm like, okay, is that what she's doing here? Ultimately, it kind of felt like none of this ever really mattered all that much, other than just she's a bit of a weirdo because she's into this, which feels a bit like dated and judgmental on the movie's part, to be honest.
So for me, by this point, I thought it was definitely weird. By the end of the movie, I thought that maybe this was all still going to be part of this plan of like framing her and making her seem like she has more of a double life going on.
Oh, right. So you thought this was all about being seen in a location like this.
Right. And specifically by the name of Allison, like being able to say, no, that Allison Jones, I remember she used to go to that sex club. Clearly she had some weird stuff going on. But no, the part that gets me the most is, like I said at the very beginning, that there is mostly by the book kind of thriller beats where I felt like I understood everything that was going on and I could predict a lot of stuff. The dog thing I knew was going to come. Like, there was no way that dog was going to escape unharmed. It came faster than I expected, but I expected it. This sequence of just all of a sudden she walks down into a sex club and sees this going on, this was not on my bingo card, man. I had no idea what we were doing here at the time of the scene, at least.
Yeah. And honestly, even by the end, I still kind of feel like it didn't actually... It felt like a massive red herring more than anything else.
It feels to be like, oh, hey, guys, it's been about like 20 minutes since you've seen boobs. Let's, even if we don't show the boobs, at least this is sexually explicit in idea.
Yeah. There's a lot of like sexual sort of implication and kind of vibe and context here. which doesn't feel out of place in the tone of the movie per se, but it is weird that it doesn't keep going further down that rabbit, hole. Like
Right.
Because the fact that it kind of does this and then just never kind of comes back up all that much later, it just says a lot. But yeah, I mean, from here, obviously she does want to get rid of her. Even goes to her neighbor to talk about it. And this is the one time the vents come into things, is that
Yes.
Hetty hears this conversation about wanting rid of her through the vents, and actually goes up and sneaks into Graham's apartment whilst Alison's still there. We see her sort of going, because he's got this kind of weird lock on his door. What are we talking about? What's the face?
No, it's not wild. It's just after she left. Like, they basically exchange places very quickly. So Allison leaves, and then Hetty comes up just afterwards.
No, she's just during the same scene.
It's like almost immediate, because that's the thing, is we see the intercut is Allison is down talking on the phone to Hetty's dad, or on the answering machine to Hetty's dad.
That's when she comes out inside, but you see her go into his apartment while Alison's still there talking to Graham. You see, there's a cutaway where you see, because he's got that weird lock on his door where it's like a metal pole that's holding up the lock, or like pressing into the lock. You see the door open and that like get pulled out the way. When Allison leaves, Hetty's already in his apartment.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. I must just missed that.
Yeah, the actual, like, her coming out and, like, she doesn't kill him, but, like, you think she might have killed him. It's unclear at the end of the scene. But
okay, I get where I got mixed up in that, though, because it's the sequence where she's sneaking in, the audio still sounds like it's coming through the vent. So I think I was, like, looking away from the screen just during that, and I hear the audio sounding a little bit off. But yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah, because basically during this scene, Allison tells Graham everything that's going on with her and her suspicions or concerns, and he's like, "Hey, I've got a therapist friend or whatever. Let's get a lawyer. Let's deal with this." And
like, they want to help Hetty. It's not like they think like she's done anything horrific at this point. So they're like, she clearly has some mental issues. We don't want to just throw her out on the street, so let's get her the help she needs.
But also, it's dangerous for you to be there alone with her. Let's actually deal with it and get rid of her. We can't just keep it going this way. So when Hetty like pops out, and from the back, he just thinks it's Allison, but then she turns around and he's like, "Oh wait, hey, I know you. I'm not going to hurt you." And he tries to approach her calmly. He doesn't try to like, and she just kind of freaks out and like grabs his like lock pole thing and starts hitting him with it. And this was like one of the moments, probably the first moment actually, where I really felt like, oh, this feels a bit silly, the way she's hitting him with it. It didn't feel real to me.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I had more of a problem with it when I thought that was supposed to be the implication that she killed him at this point.
Sure,
we find out later that that's not the case. Once it was revealed that he's still alive, I was more okay with it. But for a death scene for the character, it felt laughably bad.
Yeah, it just didn't feel like impactful enough. It felt like he went down very easily, and then the hit to the head just didn't feel like it was that much. And I kind of I think she thought she killed him here, potentially, because I think the way she just sort of leaves him in the bathtub implies to me that she did probably think he was dead, and it's maybe a surprise to her later that he kind of comes stumbling out at the right moment to save the day.
So. Here's my question, though, is that when Graham comes across her, it looks like she's about to leave the apartment. Now, my initial thought there was she just came out from a side room, and he's looking for his cat. That cat is dead.
That's what I thought.
That cat has to be dead. But we find out later it isn't. The cat is fine. So my question is, what did she do? What was the intention here?
Obviously, she was hiding. I think she was trying to hear more. It didn't seem like her intention was to necessarily try and kill him here. She got caught leaving, kind of thing.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know what she was doing.
Yeah, fair enough. It just seemed very strange to me that, like, this whole sequence happened because she was caught leaving, but she still had to get in there for some reason. So if it was just to listen better, so be it. But that seems like a lot of effort just to hear a conversation closer.
Yeah, and like you said, Allison's like on the phone trying to call her real dad and says, "Hey, I think your daughter's here." Calls back because she doesn't get him. She's gets the answering phone, but and I think at one point I just mentioned the answering machine. There was a moment earlier where Sam called before they rekindled, where Hetty kind of like swooped in and deleted the recording before Allison could hear it. Just done a little bit like that.
At that point in the movie, it still felt like she was trying to defend Allison, even if she doesn't know it, from like her being hurt again. But obviously, as the film progresses, you get, no, it's much more controlling than that.
I mean, I think for me, that was definitely the controlling line that was crossed, whereas, like, okay, this is like, even if you say you've got the best of intentions, deleting their own mail effectively before they get to it is like, okay, this is about your own self-interest, this is about working from the shadows, all that kind of thing. So, I mean, here, it's kind of awkward between them now in the apartment, where Hetty knows how Allison feels, but Allison's still trying to pretend that everything's okay, but doing a piss-poor job of it, being clearly nervous, clearly on edge.
See, I like this part of the movie, in theory, in a lot of ways, because this is where both sides know the secret. Where she knows that Allison knows that Hetty is clearly mentally unsound and she needs to get rid of her ASAP. And Hetty knows that Allison knows. And so there's this tension to it that feels like everyone's dancing on eggshells and are trying to like figure out exactly what's going on and what the next best move is. But ultimately, I feel like it goes on just a bit too long in this one. Like, we're just barely over the like halfway point to the end of the movie. And I feel like this sequence, this sort of dancing on eggshells, continues for the next like 20, possibly even 30 minutes of the movie.
I don't know if it actually is. I think that's maybe like a perspective thing almost.
I mean, I'm looking through the scroll bar right now, and I would say that the reveal that Hetty does something, which we will get to, happens at the hour 20 mark, and then this is at the hour pretty much flat, a little bit past that. So it's a full 15, 20 minutes, depending on how you cut it.
Yeah, but like, how much even happens in that time, though? Like,
well, that's what I'm saying. I feel like it just it goes on for too long, where we should have had that third act break of like, finally something has to happen.
I don't even remember anything before she like sneaks out to go see Sam, like when he gets back, before Allison knows he's back. Like, what even happens before then, like in this chunk of the movie?
The only thing that happens is she catches Hetty in the shower, and her clothes are all bloody, and she blames it on her period, but then clearly it's just Graham's blood.
Oh,
and
yeah,
then they have a brief little discussion where Allison's trying to be friendly, just like, hey, maybe we could go hang out like friends.
Oh, yeah.
Or something.
Okay, yeah, I'm remembering now. There's not much here of importance. It's basically, at one point, Hetty does actually kind of snap and says, oh, you're just thinking about yourself. You're doing this to me, and kind of like snaps at her. But then they kind of she sort of calms down and says, oh, I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And she says, it's fine, I'll find a new place. And she kind of pretends she's okay with everything for a little bit. Okay, I'd kind of like just forgotten about most of this.
Right. It's entirely pointless, and it just feels like it goes on for a bit too long of this, like, oh, we're dancing on eggshells, we don't want the other person to know. And then on top of it, we also have the Hetty's dad calling back, and Hetty's the one who picks up, and she gets super pissed off about it.
Yeah. The only real important thing here is that she kind of says, hey, I'm just looking out for you, Allison. Like, he's a cheater, so he'll cheat again. He's never going to stop. That's like the one important thing here, because ultimately that's kind of what her game plan is that when she hears he's back, and Sam calls in like the middle of the night, it's like 2 a.m. or something like that, and Allison's already in bed, Hetty answers and says, do you want me to wake her up and tell her? And he's like, nah, it's okay. I'll call her in the morning. It's no big deal.
I think his specific line was like, tell her to surprise me.
Yeah. She instead gets dressed up. Well, she puts on a coat. She doesn't really wear much under the coat.
I was going to say, that's about all she needs.
But she puts on a coat and the high heels that were mentioned earlier, and she goes to the hotel, gets into his room, and gets into bed with him. Like, takes off her coat, and she's naked underneath, gets into bed, and starts snuggling up to him. And he, of course, it's dark. He was asleep, so he just kind of starts to half wake up, and he can see the hair, and he's like, oh, hey, Allison, what you doing? And like, she starts going down south to give him oral sex. And of course, as he says a few more things, she's already started. He's enjoying it. He's getting into it. And then at a certain point, not before the finish though, admittedly, like she looks up and he can see who it is, and he kind of reacts to that, obviously, but she just ignores anything he says and just finishes. And clearly, quite quickly after that, it's intense, and he finishes, he climaxes.
Yeah.
And then she kind of like slowly slinks back up and kind of kisses him in the neck, and he looks like mortified. And this is actually a moment. This moment, I feel like, is hitting on something that is very complex, and like a movie from this time period tackling it is actually something that could be interesting. Now, they kind of gloss over it for the most part, and it's because he's dead by the end of the scene, so they don't really even have to deal with it. But in my head, I'm thinking, okay, she's done this to trick him, and now she's going to tell Allison that he had, he had slept with her, whatever, and, break up the relationship, so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But let's not gloss over the fact here that this man has effectively just been sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
Right?
No, here's the thing. I was expecting this movie not to play it as seriously as they did, because they gloss over it a bit, but it is still there. I think he practically curls up in fetal position after it's all said and done.
No, that's what I'm saying. His reaction actually plays it pretty much how it should be played. His reaction is actually good. It's a good reaction to what's just happened to him. He clearly feels this mixture of weird shame and whatever else he's going through. But the reason why I say it glosses over it, though, is because he's dead by the end of the scene, we never actually have to have him tell Allison this happened. Right. I actually think that's where the real maturity could have came from, is because I could kind of understand from her perspective of just saying, what, you're saying you didn't know it was me? And her, not believing him and thinking that he did just do something inappropriate and going down that path. And actually having to convince her, no, hey, I was kind of assaulted here. If he'd even phrase it that way, I'm not sure he would even feel comfortable saying that. He may not be able to think about it that way, because some guys can't, especially when we go further back in time. I feel like guys have a trouble admitting that now, never mind 30 plus years ago.
I'm also just going to throw out that we also had Allison assaulted in the earlier scene, and while emotionally she plays the reaction well, I don't think the script does anything with it in any meaningful regard. I mean, so I think on both sides of the coin here, male and female, I don't feel like it's interested in exploring that.
That's true, although that does come up in this scene where Hedy says, hey, her boss almost raped her, and she confided that in me, and he's like, wait, I didn't know about that. And he does seem concerned. He's taken aback. He's like, wait, that happened? I want to know about that. But that's what I'm getting at, though, is that his reaction actually feels like a genuine, decent attempt at someone who's just been assaulted, and it plays with a little bit of nuance with the way he reacts to it. And I was thinking, I'm expecting them to fumble this as soon as they actually have to start talking about it. But then the movie just kind of circumvents it by, oh no, he's dead by the end of the scene, so he never actually has to have that conversation with Allison about what's went on here, and about how the fact that he is a victim in the scene, and maybe even play with this idea that she'll have trouble believing him because he actually has cheated on her once before, and where's the line there of actually finding out how can he convince her that, how can she believe that, and should she believe it, and all these just other things that could actually be quite a really difficult conversation, but the movie obviously is never going to even get close to it.
One other aspect of the scene that I really like is while we see his reaction, and it is, as you said, a very good reaction, I also really like the cockiness that Hedy has immediately following this. She gets up and she's just like, all right, so I basically won this game here. I'm able to go and I'm going to tell her what happened, and you cheated on her because of course you were always going to cheat on her. And he's just like, that's not what happened at all. She's like, oh, she's not going to believe you. It's not going to matter.
I mean, I think this is the scene really more than anything that kind of just put the nail in the coffin of what the direction was, because I think this is the scene that says, no, she doesn't want to replace her. She wants her for herself, and therefore wants to break up this, she's idolizing her, but not in this way. She wants to replace her, right? It's very different than,
but even going into this scene, you wouldn't know that, because it's still following that possible seduction route. It's only her explaining her motives at the end that you're like, okay, clearly this is just a breakup. She doesn't care if he actually likes her at all.
And she basically tries to blackmail and says, hey, we don't have to actually, I don't have to tell her. If you want to end this with more dignity, you can just tell her you're going back with your ex-wife or something, and we'll just end this here, and no one has to, get sullied in the result.
Win-win for her,
right?
Regardless, he's out.
To be fair, honestly, the best thing in this script might be his reaction to that, which is, screw you, I'm going to tell her exactly what happened, because I actually think,
right now.
Yeah, I actually think that was the most genuine response he could have given to that. Is no, I want to tell her. I want this to be out in the open. I want the truth to be out. So I'm going to tell you. You think you're going to scare me because of my past into not telling her this? No, you've just victimized me. I'm going to go tell her, and it's becoming clear that you're a monster and you're playing everyone around you. So I'm going to go tell her quite happily.
Yeah, that's what I really like about the psychopath plots when they're done properly, when like they really explore different human dynamics, is a lot of times you get to see how these psychopaths, sociopaths, abusive people in general, they take the basic framework of like shame and fear that all people feel, and they manipulate it into getting exactly what they want out of it. And obviously she tries to play on both here, the shame that he just cheated on her and the fear that he's going to be found out about it. And she's like, no, I get it, I know how this is going to go. But then he surprises her by saying like, I don't care about that, I love her enough that I'm going to go and do that. And that's when she loses control of the situation and unfortunately has to get violent.
Yeah. She grabs her shoe and stabs him in the eye with a high heel, which I did still think was silly. Like, I still thought it had a silly kind of quality to it.
I thought that the motion itself was fine. What got me was as he's dead on the ground, she just like nudges him with her foot and says like, hey. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's dead. What are you trying to get out of this?
It just came off a bit hokey, I guess, more than anything. I mean, I enjoyed this one more than the other violent scenes just because it was more like a cheesy slasher movie kill as opposed to whatever else. But it definitely still felt a bit more cartoony than the serious tone the movie is otherwise going for, you know?
Yeah, I guess I don't know what I want out of it because by the time we get to the end, we see what a quote-unquote fight scene in this movie is. And I'm glad we didn't get another one of those.
Not great, Bob. Not great.
Yeah. So the fact that we kept this very short and sweet, I'm more okay with doing it in that way.
I just don't think this director had a handle on how to actually do action or violence. Like, these moments just fall a bit flat. Even though I do think the visual of him with the heels, like his shoe sticking out of his eye, is like a fun visual on its own after he's been stabbed. That's all it really comes down to. But honestly, this scene might have been the most I ever really cared about a character in the whole movie. And I think it's just because his reaction to what just happened actually felt genuinely human in a way that everything else just felt like a movie plot. This felt like, oh no, you're actually hitting a real, like, guttural, like, reaction to this. Whereas everything with Allison and like, oh, my roommate might be crazy and up to something, it all just felt like typical movie shenanigans, you know? Whereas this felt like, oh, you're actually hitting at something a little bit harder here. So, you know, I don't know if there's something cynical here about, unless it happens to be like outright sexual assault, they can't elicit an emotion out of me, and what does that say about the direction of the rest of the plot? Or it's just a case of this is actually touching on something that's a bit more heady and therefore actually makes me feel something. But regardless, it's definitely the most I felt the entire movie.
No, yeah, I definitely agree with that. I feel like it's put a lot into the fact of, I don't feel like the emotionality of any character is really ever brought to a forefront. Even Hetty in her most manic moments, just, it still felt very controlled in a lot of ways. This is the first time where, yes, it is not a bombastic emotion. It's not like a major explosive thing. It's a much more quiet, subdued sort of moment, but it felt, like you said, genuine. It felt like this was a real emotional moment. And
I think the other thing, to compare this scene and the scene where Allison was like almost assaulted, right? You know, with the Weinstein-y scene, right? I think the reason, well, that scene wasn't terrible by any means, but I think this one worked much better and it hit harder. Not just because it actually happened and it, you know, it went through with it and the character had to like deal with that, but I think it's just purely down to the fact that the villain in her scene is this very much a side character who's a bit like two-dimensional. He's a bit goofier and he's kind of just there to be that role. Here, because this is the movie's actual villain and this is like just how sinister her plan is, it just feels all a bit more like, I don't know, calculated and evil in a way that it really feels like it hits a bit harder. So, like, because it is weird to say this scene hits hard and the other one doesn't hit that hard, but I think it's down to the other one almost feels more generic because there's lots of scenes where women are treated like that in a movie, whereas this feels like it's a bit more different and unique.
Yeah, I also feel like it's coming down to the line of, okay, Stephen Tobolowsky's character is a side character. Whatever consequences befall him, they're not going to impact the plot that much.
That was the other thing, right? At this point in the movie, I had this thought where I'm like, wait, the guy that tried to rape her is the only one who's not had comeuppance in this movie. Everyone else who's nice to her, like her fiance, who did make a mistake but seems to be a fine guy afterwards, Her neighbor, who's like her best friend, like they've all suffered some kind of demise or whatever.
Yep.
And that character's getting off scot-free. And there's a point not too much after this where it looked like he may end up being the one that saves the day. And I thought, movie, you can't have him be the one who saves the day. That is going to be unforgivable.
Yeah.
Obviously, that doesn't quite come to pass, but it almost does.
Yeah. But no, what I was just saying there, of Tobolowsky's a side character. It feels like whatever consequences may or may not befall him is not going to be that consequential to the plot. Whereas we have the primary antagonist and the primary romantic interest. Obviously, whatever the fallout here is, it's going to impact things. So I feel like that's where it's meant with a bit more seriousness.
Sure.
And why it hits a bit harder.
To be fair to that, though, the victim in the other scene is the main character, so while the ramifications for the culprit might not be as important to the plot, it should be devastating because the main character
should be, except she's been the victim the entire movie, just to a different character. Like, there's no change of status quo here. She still just is having to go through this hell of a life.
Yeah. So, I mean, from here, like, obviously her plan, like, it kind of starts to take shape, right? Because she goes home and she starts, like, getting rid of, like, the excess clothes. She actually, like, this apartment building for some reason has a giant industrial-sized incinerator in the basement. I don't know why.
The fact that nobody went into that incinerator is absolutely disappointing to me.
Sure, yeah, it's kind of wild. But, like, that seems like a wise choice, right? That seems like what we should do. But she starts, like, getting rid of all the evidence. She cleans the apartment to clean all of her fingerprints. And it's obviously Allison, like, the next day, she sees on the news, a dead body's been found at this hotel, this white man, blah, blah, blah. We haven't identified the victim yet.
But then, like, someone says, I heard a scuffle from this specific room number. And she immediately is like, wait a minute, I know that room number.
Yeah.
So at that point, Hetty comes back up from, like, dumping stuff in the incinerator. She sees that Allison is freaking out. And Allison's just like, I just felt a bit sick. I feel better now. I'm going to leave without getting dressed. Goodbye.
Yeah, this part frustrated me because the whole conceit here is that Allison has realized that her fiance is dead and that she assumes that her crazy roommate has probably got something to do with it. So she's nervous and she wants to leave, but she's trying to pretend that she doesn't know anything's up because that'll immediately make Hetty act out and maybe do something bad. So she's trying to play it cool, but she keeps, like, I'm leaving. Oh, wait, you're still in your nightgown. Oh, I'm a silly goose. I'll go put on clothes. And that, like, annoyed me because I felt like it was playing it almost too lighthearted. Just in the sense that all these things of, like, I expect, like, more of, like, a comedic thriller to be doing this thing where, the character's forgotten to put on pants because they're scared of the killer. Right. But it didn't feel like it fit here where, no, you actually should be terrified right now and you're making these dumbass mistakes that are making you look like you're up to something when it wouldn't actually be that big a deal if you just put on some clothes and said, I'm going to go speak to my neighbor friend. Of course, one of the details here is it says, Graham just called me, I'm going to go talk to him, which immediately Hetty's like, did he now? Suspicious.
I'm going to go ahead and doubt that one.
But
that being said, I do like how it transitions here, because as much as I hated this little, like, dancing on eggshells, everyone has to pretend they don't know what they know, the bluntness with which Hetty just drops the act is almost a relief after that point. Like, it feels so just like, yeah, he's dead, I killed him, it's what happened, let's move on.
Yeah, there's a whole bit actually before that she drops the act where Allison goes into the bathroom, sees the bloody shoe, and is, like, on the floor, and she's pretending she feels sick to explain why she's in such a weird position and all that stuff. Yeah, like, from this point on, right, obviously the plan goes into action, and she's basically like, hey, what are you going to do? Tell the police your roommate did it? My name's not on the lease, and no one's seen me. And she's like,
what roommate?
Yeah, and she's like, yes, they have. Like, yeah, no one that I've left alive. like your fiance is dead, and she doesn't say that her neighbor's dead, but certainly that's what she's thinking as she's saying that. So
and she's like, I wiped down all the prints, and anybody who's seen me, like, I'm wearing your clothes, and I look exactly like you.
I've got your haircut, yeah. And in fact, one of the little details is she's leaving the hotel after she killed Sam. The concierge sees her from the back and says, "Oh, bye, Allison," and she's like, "Bye." Like, so the concierge is going to be a witness that says, yes, this woman was leaving the hotel at the time of the death, or just after the time of death. So, like, she set up this whole thing, and it's like, oh, that's dangerous. But obviously, she tries to run. You know, she
tries to run. She specifically says, like, "Hey, look, I still want us to be a thing. Like, I want us to be a team. So you're coming with me. We're gonna start a new life elsewhere. Let's go."
And then they go to Graham's apartment, and she tapes her to a chair. Right? She tapes her to a chair. Says, "I've got to go and run some errands. I need to pick up a check. So I've
got to return some videotapes.
I've taped you to a chair. Here's the remote control of the TV. Put on the movie channel. You'll be fine." And it's not until after she comes back, actually, during all the scuffles and stuff, but we find out later that Graham is lying in the bathtub and his cat's just sort of like chilling on top of him, and I thought, oh, he's lying on a dead body. But then Graham starts to move, and I'm like, oh, okay, he's fine, which makes sense, because it wasn't that much of a killing blow, so good, I guess.
We also have in the middle here where Hetty changes her hair color back, just so when we get to these poorly done fight scenes, we don't have to question who the hell we're looking at.
Yeah, but even from like an in-universe like context, it's like, oh, hey, I can't look like you anymore. You're a murder suspect now. So, I
think she even says, like, we're going to do your hair next, so that way we can slip through security.
Can I just, I did not expect Tobolowsky's character, you know, the boss at the fashion company, to come back into it. And he comes back into this movie in such a wild way.
Yep.
So Allison, it turns out, is a failsafe for not being paid for her service of designing all this stuff with her computer software for the fashion company. Built in, basically, you know when you buy like a software, you're not paid for it, or you not bought it, but you've downloaded the trial for a software, and you've been using it for the month that you get for free, but then it comes up at the end saying, oh, you need to pay to continue using it. It's that on steroids, where all of a sudden in this fashion designer's office, the entire system starts erasing all of the data in front of them, and he's like, what's going on? And we even see him, he's like flirting with like another female employee. He's got like in his chair, and he's like, oh, isn't that nice? And he's like massaging her shoulders, until the secretary shouts on him and says, hey, something's happening. And a pop-up comes up after everything's erased saying, this is due to a failure to not pay Allison for her services. Call her within 24 hours or your data will be gone for good. And I'm like, okay, I get that he deserves this, right? But she didn't know what a creep he was when she put this into her system, presumably.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I'm sure if she could have come... Well, here's the thing. They do, during the scene where she's being talked down by Hetty after the assault, she says, like, oh, don't worry, he'll pay. Like, I've got that figured out.
This felt like... I mean, don't get me wrong, she's right for doing it in the sense that he does try to, like, you know, weasel out of everything. But at the same time, it feels ultra, like, dirty tactics-wise.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like...
This struck me as the sort of thing that she put in after whatever bad stuff went down with her previous business partner. Like, this is one of those things that, like, there might have been some more backstory written in at some point that explains why she felt it necessary to put this in. But ultimately in the movie, it just feels kind of out of character for her overall. Like... It at no point in here did I feel like she was this kind of like backhanded in terms of how she dealt with this software business of hers. It came out of nowhere for me.
Yeah, it felt like something. Nothing about the character to me said, oh, she's built in a failsafe that's going to like catch them by surprise and have them by the balls. It felt just out of nowhere, just an excuse to bring him, like, to make him want to come see her. To like deal with this, because
that's the part what I was saying before. They use the dial up, like at this point in the movie, I think they've set up this computer in order to buy tickets from New York to LA, and so they're hooked up onto the internet to buy these tickets, and they're doing that while Steven Tobolowsky is trying to call them to get the payment done.
This is after she's left and come back, and Allison's trick to try and get help is to turn the TV up really loud so the neighbors will get mad. And the building super or whoever is like almost like coming in with the master key. And this is just in time Hetty shows up and is able to stop it and talk him down. And she's like, look, you keep trying to like get away. I'm just going to have to like end this. And she pulls out a knife and puts it to her neck. And it's only because Allison kisses her and says something like, "Oh, you know,"
she's like, "Don't make me leave you,"
yeah,
or something like that.
She basically manipulates her back a little bit to keep herself alive. And she's like, "Okay, I guess we'll go. So, how about LA? Let's book tickets." So this was actually blowing my mind. There was a scene of her like buying airplane tickets on the internet in 1992, and I'm like, "Whoa, this seems like so ahead of its time." Like, this is obviously even just like 15 years, like 10 years later, even. Seems normal, but in 1992, this is like high tech stuff.
That's I accepted it in the scene. I was like, okay, I'm sure that like it's going to work out, or at least it does as much as it does for the movie. But all I could think after the scene ended was like, how are you gonna get those tickets to you? There's no printer here. There's no. How are you going to prove you bought those tickets?
Well, yeah, I assume, because when you book airplane tickets, you have to put in your passport number. I assume you show up, show your passport, and they give them to the desk at the airport.
You don't got to do, I mean, I don't know if it's changed since 1992, but you don't got to do passport for in the United States.
It definitely has, well, I don't know if it's just in the US. I know in the UK after 9/11 it changed, where even a domestic flight into passport. That's a good point. I know these days you just have it on your phone in the app and you just flash that at them.
Well, clearly, yeah, but that's an app.
Yes, I agree. That's not a 1992 thing. Look, people who had computers in 1992 also had printers, okay? It's normal now not to have a printer, but in 1992...
No, but see, that's the thing. I as much as I hate the printer I have now, I keep it in the corner and I never dust it just to let it know it's been a bad boy. But as much as I hate it, I trust it so much more than I would trust any printer in 1992 to do its job properly.
Look, I don't know, maybe it's not instant. Maybe you get mailed the tickets. Maybe it's not for booking tickets for like tomorrow. You book it for tickets in a week, so they've got a few days to come in the mail.
Well, that seems very poorly thought out on their behalf, but fair enough.
Look, I don't know what the system was, right? If someone says... technically, you can actually order tickets online in 1992. I'd believe you, because it does sound plausible that it's not possible. But then, why would they even think of putting this in the movie if it wasn't a thing that someone realized they could do and be like, oh, I'm excited, let's talk about that in the movie?
I mean, I think if we're looking at it from the metatextual standpoint, I think the point is, how do we make it so the phone line is definitely not functional? And so they just do this. And it also serves the double purpose of, as she tries to distract Hetty and tells her to go off and do something else, she hops into like an email client software or something, and basically it's just like, send help, this is not a joke, I'm at this location.
This is a very early example of someone trying to save themselves with a computer message. Like, this is something I associate with mid-90s, so I'm impressed that it's here this early. And I'm like, wait, are you sending this to, like, because I assumed it was like connected to her system that she built, so I thought that it was going to be like
it's going to pop up on like Tobolski's computer.
And it's like, oh, this is going to be an interesting like potential, like just the idea that he has to like choose to come and see what she's talking about or something, but instead no, he just storms in because he wants to speak to her because of her failsafe that came up. So as a result, he comes in to like the building, and like basically during this, Hetty's just like disposing of stuff and going up and down, and she sees him, and they end up at the same door, and he's like, oh, I'm looking for Allison so-and-so, and she's like, yeah, I don't know anyone by that name. He's like, yeah, I know she's not on this floor, but I know she can come at this address too, because I've contacted her here before. But then he notices the suitcase she's carrying, which Hetty was just testing to see if she could fit a person in there. She was like lying down in it. He's like, wait a minute, this is Allison's suitcase, you do know her. And we get this whole thing where like he comes in and finds Allison like taped up and lying on the floor, and so even though in this scene, and just on this scene, might I add, he's not actually doing anything necessarily wrong, because he is going to try and like help her and like get her out, because you know he's not necessarily prone to murder or anything. But I swear, both the first time and then the second time after he's hit Hetty to get her out of the way, he like when he goes down to like try and like undo the tape to help her out, he sits on her in the most like sexual way possible. Like, why are you not just leaning down next to her? But no, he has to get on top of her and like try to cut the tape that way.
I'm as much as he is an actual out and out creep, I think that even if he weren't that level of creep, he would still be the guy who just doesn't understand normal social boundaries.
Maybe. But
Like,
obviously,
he's the guy who wouldn't have a problem of just like, oh, what's that? You want a massage? Yeah, sure. I'll just get right on in there.
yeah, like, this is obviously the moment where I was thinking to myself, don't tell me he's the saving the day, that he's the one that shows up and helps. And
I was bouncing between both horrible options. Option one being that he saves the day. Option two is that he's like, well, you're not in a position to fight back this time.
oh,
Like,
that would have
both
been
of
really
those would have
dark.
sucked. Yes,
Yeah.
it would have. But like, I didn't know where they were going with it because it was weird that he was here at all.
Instead, he just, and again, somehow, even though he's talking about like stopping like a potential killer, when he says, oh, don't worry about Hetty, I took care of her, I thought, first of all, she hits you over the head 2 seconds after you said that line, so clearly you didn't. But secondly, you phrased it in a creepy way. Like, you stopped a killer and somehow you came out sounding like a creep. I don't, like, I don't know, it's just like everything about it. It's a whole
No, you're
thing.
right. You're right. It's a very, especially because the sole purpose of it seems to be, we recognize this guy needs to get his comeuppance, and we also need to allow Hetty to get another kill in.
Yes. Yes.
Like, that's the only reason this entire sequence happens, because the end of it is essentially the exact same as where we started it.
Pretty much. It's just another hurdle, and then we could have just continued from before if we wanted to. Which is basically that Hetty gets a gun that she had hidden in a bag somewhere, in a shoe. It was a boot. She had a gun in a boot. And she pulls out this gun, and I swear that there was multiple times in this fight where they're like sort of like struggling when she's holding the gun and they're fighting in the hallway, where I'm like, why isn't a single shot went off? Like, I don't understand. I mean, obviously she uses it to kill Tobolowsky's character. She puts the pillow on his head and does the whole, the cheap silence method, which, whatever, right?
Yeah, it's just a pillow over him.
Right? And they're having this fight, and this is when Graham's kind of woke up and he stumbles out just enough to like grab Hetty to give Alison a chance to,
Yes.
get
So
away
can
or
I-
whatever.
Can I interject one scene that I really want to talk about? Because I think it's actually one of the best misdirects of this movie.
By all means, go on.
So we open up this sequence and it's Hetty, handful of pills, and she's just saying stuff like, I don't want to kill again. I don't need a reason to kill myself. I need a reason not to.
Just to interject here, there's so many little bits as this movie goes back and forth at this point that I had just completely forgotten about this. Hey, I'm going to make you write a suicide note and then take all these pills.
That's the thing, though, is that it's so focused on her, and she's delivering this monologue of just saying, like, I don't want to kill again. I don't need a reason not to kill myself. Like, this is it for me. I'm so sorry. Goodbye. And then it zooms out and shows that she's just dictating this suicide note to Allison and says, do you want to add anything else? No? Okay, sign it, put your name on it, take these pills. It's like, Jesus, that is so dark, but I absolutely love it because it immediately takes place after Stephen Tobolowsky's character is shot. So you think like, okay, maybe she does actually have some level of remorse for killing people, and like it is something that she's upset about. And then it just zooms out and says like, nope, now you're gonna die. It's like, oh, brilliant. You made her that much more darker.
Yeah. So yeah, she throws the glass in her face or something. I can't remember like how she fights her, but this is how the fight starts. The struggle starts, and then everything happens. And there's a whole thing here where I kept being like, why isn't the gun fired during this fight once? I feel like there'd be multiple times where she'd be like, try to pull the trigger. It feels like at several points, like she's actually like facing the barrel of the gun and Hetty could just win at any point and just doesn't because the plot requires her not to yet.
The part that gets me is they have her slam Hetty's like hand in the door enough that she's stunned for a second. But I'm like, 1 second tops. You're laying there for like 5 seconds of just looking at your hand with the gun still in it. It's not like she dropped the gun even. Well, she's still got the gun in hand. And she's like, oh, right, I can shoot her as she runs away.
And not even just that, like when she slams the door into her hand and it's literally just the hand with the gun sticking out of the door, I was like, why not hold the gun shut and just reach down and like pull the gun out of her hand? Because if you're holding the door against her wrist, like she's going to struggle to hold on to that if you really try and like kick her or something. Like just kick the hand until the gun falls out. But no,
a lot of stupid decisions are made in the choreography of this fight scene.
Yeah, and we're not even at the horror movie part yet, where like it looks like she's lost. It looks like Hetty's strangled her to death, but I guess Allison's just faking being dead to throw her off. So we get this scene where Allison does I'll call it the end of Halloween H2O, where Laurie disappears and Michael's the one looking around trying to find the victim. So it's her hiding. She ends up being in like the vent up top, but like basically Hetty's like, where does she go? Where is she? And she's like really frustrated. They're down the basement area. She
literally pulls out a hook hand. Like, that is her weapon of choice to end this. There's just a random ass hook that she's just carrying around.
It's in like there's like a closet of like maintenance stuff in this basement, and it's just she pulls it out of there. So
it's just so typical, like you were saying, slasher movie. We literally have a hook-handed villain coming after our protagonist here.
Yeah, in fact, to also defend, you were complaining about the foreshadowing of the screwdriver in the elevator, which they use to like, unwedge something because it gets stuck sometimes.
Yep.
As she's being strangled, she tries to reach for it, like, oh, here it comes. She's going to use the screwdriver to save herself, and she doesn't, and she just sort of like seemingly dies. Obviously, she doesn't really, but she at least fakes dying. And it's like, oh no, that's not how it comes up. But it does come up later because she has it as a weapon later when she stabs her.
I'll be honest with how much you've forgotten in this movie. I will gladly say I forgot that she didn't just manage to stab her. Like, I'm willing to give it back some Chekhov's gun points because they did do that little bait and switch there and then use it again later. I'm okay with that.
All right, okay. So was it Peter was right earlier? I was wrong?
No. I still hate the way that they broadcasted it. I have no, but like, the way they brought it back later is okay.
That's not what that sounded like. It sounded like you were conceding everything to me.
You know, you're right. I believe it was either last week or this week on the Ace. I cursed in an episode and you were holding me to $5,000 as a penalty. Where do I make that first payment, Pete? Because you're right. Absolutely. I'm conceding everything.
Actually, it was only $1,000, but I'll accept this inflation rate that you've went with.
Damn it. That's my fault.
Anyway, so yeah, there's this whole bit where she's hiding and then she kind of realizes she's up in the vents, but by the time she goes up to look, she's already gone. And then, it's all very typical like slasher movie stuff where she jumps out and stabs at her for like a bit of a jump scare.
Well, she goes out, she thinks that she sees Allison's clothes hanging out of a cupboard. And she's like, you stupid idiot. I can see your clothes.
It's literally bait. And then she jumps out from behind her and stabs her.
No, she doesn't. Did you miss this bit?
What bit?
This is the bit that I thought you were talking about as the worst choreography. It's the dumbest part.
Oh, I probably did, but I've forgotten it now. Go on, remind me. What is it?
She's still in the vents. She's still up top. And so she like does a sit-up and like comes down with her feet dangling up above and stabs her in the back and then goes back up again.
Right. I can't believe I forgot this. Yeah. So when she jumps in to stab her, she isn't just standing behind her. You're right. She is gymnastic style, holding herself up with her feet at the top of the pipes, and she sort of dangles down like Spider-Man and stabs her when she's upside down. You're right. I can't believe I forgot about this. This made me laugh. This was much like the first, like, hitting Graham with the pole, which I thought looked stupid. This made me proper laugh out loud. This was fun. I'm glad you're correcting me on that because I was
so
howling.
Dumb.
I'm like, wait, why is she doing this like she's like a gymnast all of a sudden? Like, it'd be one thing if her backstory was she's a gymnast, but she isn't. This is just out of nowhere. She's pulling this weird move from the ceiling.
I'd even be fine with it if she came down from the ceiling and like tackled and stabbed at the same time. But it's the fact that not only did she come down, like she lowered her body using core strength and then went back up again. Like, it's the going back up again that made me laugh. Like, we're just setting up for another sneak attack.
I agree. If she's just hiding up there and like sort of jumps down and stabs her on the way down, it'd be a little fantastical, but it's fine. But yeah, her doing this fancy like sort of like backward sit up thing while she's holding her feet up or holding herself up with her feet, it's just it felt so over the top and silly. And then for some reason at the end she like narrates to like close the movie, even though that's been not a thing the entire time.
Dude, they just had no idea how to end this movie. Like, absolutely. No. It is not even an ending. It's just like, I get sad when I think about my dead fiance, but then I try to forgive Hetty because that's what he would want. That's all. And then he just plays music.
Yeah, and it ends on a photograph of like, it's like a photograph of her and a photograph of Hetty, like it's split in two and like sort of like Two-Face style. And it just like freeze frames in that for the credits. I guess we're just to assume that because Graham's still alive, he was able to corroborate this crazy neighbor story, and because this crazy neighbor's there, they just sort of the police accepted that. I guess
they're like, all right, Let's listen to the woman who spends her time in sex clubs. Why not?
Oh dear. It's a middling movie that has some decent enough ideas at points and some decent enough scenes. One particular, or maybe two standout scenes, some silly moments. But I have to admit, going through it and talking about the sequence of events again is, if anything, it's made me like it even less, because I'd almost like just naturally forgotten about some stuff because it went through so many of these back and forths that you could have trimmed out, like, it's not even that long a movie, but you could have trimmed down like 10 minutes and just made things not feel as repetitive, I think, towards the end.
Oh yeah, no, the third act was awful in terms of, obviously, like, we should have been able to, the moment she says your fiance is dead, the moment she drops that bomb, it should be moving very rapid pace to a narrative finish, and it should feel like everything follows from everything else. Or
not even like, even if it's not a rapid pace, it should stick to like one core idea of what the rest of the act is. Like, if it's going to be her held captive now for the third act until she's able to escape and have the fight, that's fine. But it goes so back and forth of, like, okay, she's held captive. Oh, now she's convinced her she's going to leave with her. Oh no, she was tricking her, so now she wants to kill her again. Oh no, someone might be coming to save her. Oh no, he's dead. Oh, the other guy's alive. Now it's a slasher movie, like, finale. Like, it goes back and forwards between things constantly. Like, oh, she's going to stab her. Oh, now she believes she's her friend. Oh, now she's making her commit suicide with pills and write a suicide note. Like, it just goes back and forward too many times between too many ideas. See if the movie started off with the opening act was, oh, I'm obsessed with you, and by the end of Act 1, she's held captive, and then you went through all these ideas over the course of a whole story. Like, this was the story, was like the trials and tribulations of this crazy woman holding someone else captive because they want a new sister. That would possibly be good. I mean, it depends on the execution, of course, but it could have been fine. But it goes through so many like different beats in the third act that it's kind of exhausting. And
I think there's a place for the idea of it being weird and ecstatic enough of like what it's doing that you question what the antagonist's motives even are. And we were going on about that of like, does she want to replace Allison? Does she want to like be alone with her? What is her main motivation here? I think there's a place for that, but this just didn't quite nail that either.
I mean, to add to that, it could have been like an erratic thing where she is like unhinged and she doesn't even know, she keeps changing her mind. If they really sold us on that idea of it, that could have worked potentially.
Yeah, but like by the time it hit the end of the movie, it felt like it was less of a thing where they were trying to sell me on something and more that the writers themselves didn't even know how they wanted to treat this character.
And I think it's also not entertaining enough consistently in a goofy, because like I say, her coming down from the ceiling like Spider-Man at the end was really funny. And if more of this stuff had been like that, I would maybe I'd love the pacing at that point, because like, if they're all silly things and they're all making me laugh, I'd love the breakneck amount of ideas if they were all funny bad. But they're not. They're mostly just underwhelming or not that good. It's only the very last one that ends up being funny.
Yeah. I mean, the other, like you said, the other assaults are stupid in how they're performed, but not in script writing, just in the way they look on screen.
Yeah, the murders, not so much the sexual assault stuff. That's a bit more...
Oh, yeah.
See, there's nothing really funny about those, certainly.
I'll be honest, I kind of forgot that those happened for a second.
Yeah, it's just because you said the word assault instead of murders. I just don't want people to confuse it with sexual assault, because...
Yeah, I said assault just in order to include the Graham one as well, instead of
it was attempted murder.
Yeah, that's fair.
To be fair. Murder or the attempt to do so.
Perfect.
Yeah, all right. Okay, this review is actually over 2 hours at this point. We have been on for a long time. So, scene of the movie, and I know it's probably going to be the same one for both of us, but go on.
You know, I was going into it, I wasn't sure. I was thinking about it, but I really wasn't sure
until we talked about it.
Yeah, then we talked about it. It's got to be the sexual assault scene on Sam. There's no other option there, because it is just the most genuine moment of the movie.
Yeah, his reaction, his rebuttal to her plan, like all of it just makes it the most interesting scene. It feels like it's doing something actually kind of daring, and it's actually tackling a tough subject for a brief moment in time. So that'll be it. MVP of the movie.
I mean, this one's a bit tougher for me. I think Allison is just clear and out not MVP. So as protagonist, that is kind of a bad thing for her.
She's a frustrating main character because she just keeps making dumb decisions.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there is an argument for Hetty. I think that she is, given enough development and stuff, and we do see a bunch, but I do think by the end of it, she is also just as frustrating in a lot of ways. So that kind of just puts me into side character territory a lot of ways, but
I know who I'm picking.
Okay.
I'll pick.
I think I'm going to go, strangely enough, with Graham.
Okay.
The upstairs neighbor. I think that Sam is a bit too one note for me, as is Stephen Tobolowsky's character. Tobolowsky is the one I was really debating with, but I think ultimately he is kind of just a plot device more so than a character. I think that Graham, the part that sold me on him is there's a sequence that we kind of skipped over where he's calling his therapist and is like describing the symptoms that were described to him of what Hetty is.
It's right before he hears something that lets him catch Hetty leaving his apartment, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that does wonders for his character to show, like, no, he cares about her enough that, like, he's getting involved in this of his own volition and, like, saying, like, no, I'm gonna do what I can to help out as much as possible.
I'll also just to add to Graham, like, I don't think he's, like, a super amazing character or anything, but I will give the movie credit. He's a gay character who is not a stereotype. He seems like a pretty normal dude by and large. Yeah. There's nothing, they don't give him any, like, camp flourishes or anything like that. He's pretty... pardon the word, but he's pretty straight played, Yeah.
No, he's definitely a lot better than a lot of other 90s things that were going on with the gay best friend.
For sure. I'm going with the woman who is an incest survivor.
Yeah, okay. Her one scene wonder, not even?
Just because I wanted to say that sentence, and that's the only reason.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to say that because I thought it was a funny sentence. So that's my pick.
We never even mentioned her follow-up line. She gets into the kitchen and she's like, oh, kitchens. I hate kitchens. So feminine.
Oh, I didn't remember her saying that.
Yeah. It's like, what are you as a character?
Yeah. It's like someone just picked weird opinions out of a hat or something. All right. Okay, rating. We're on to rating. Yeah. How do you go?
Okay. It's not going to be good. I'll tell you that much. It's a frustrating movie in a lot of ways. I think that it does have those few moments that do catch you genuinely off guard, and that is good for a thriller. I think that that's something that is worth applauding. But ultimately, on a lot of ways that even I'm just realizing as we talk about it, I'm not really satisfied with how we ended up here. And the fact that, like, what we leave on kind of feels like the dumbest point of the movie rather than this big climactic thing is just soured me on a lot of it. So all in all, I think I'm just going to give this like a straight 5. I think the goods and the bads kind of balance themselves out, but like it's only barely squeaking up to that 5. I think if there was one more thing wrong with it, it would sink down to beneath it.
Yeah, I think you're expecting there to, like, some of the backstory of Hetty to come to a bit more of a head, no pun intended, by the end of the movie.
You said that earlier on as well. You were like, oh yeah, this character's played in like a really heady way. And I'm like,
I didn't mean
what?
Yeah, that's what it is. But I think ultimately, though, it's never anything more than just she's crazy and that's it, right? It never becomes any deeper than that. It never becomes more specific, and not that it always has to be more specific, but it felt like the movie was prodding at something. It felt like the movie was prodding at a backstory. The fact that it even started with this little scene of her as a little girl with her sister trying on makeup and this sort of dreamlike sequence suggests that her backstory is going to be very important to the movie. In a almost Norman Bates-esque, this is like why this character is the way this is, that the way she is, what's led to this point, and it just never matters really beyond just, oh, she's crazy and always wants a sister, but when the sister doesn't turn out the way she wants, she ends up killing them. That's the impression you get by the end, and it just becomes killer stalking victim. So it's almost like any attempt it had to have any kind of weight to it, it just gets more and more dumbed down until at the very, very end it's boiled down to the basic suspenseful like premise that it's trying to be, and that's it.
Right.
So yeah, a couple of okay moments or surprising moments or ideas, but I don't think you're too far off. I'm going to be a dick and just go one step below and say 4.5.
All right, fair enough.
I think it just doesn't quite get to that 5. for some of the reasons listed. And I think if anything, talking about it just made me like it less. I think I was just sort of sludging through it and feeling okay, but talking about it and like all the things that it doesn't quite achieve has made me just sort of nudge it down a little bit. So
yeah, it reminds me of like giving book reports and stuff at school. Like I'd be fine enough reading a boring ass book, but forcing me to talk about it is just like, well, now I just resent it all the more.
Yeah. So
real quick, I don't think this is gonna be much of a debate. Cut from the collection.
I mean, it's definitely cut from the collection. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it's any lower than that?
No.
For anybody who doesn't know, there's cut from the collection, then cut your losses is the next step down.
And It Cuts Deep is the ultra low tier for the worst of the worst. No, I think it's just cut from the collection. It's in that kind of, it's a safe, funnily enough, a safe Hollywood thriller, and it's never more interesting than that. But I don't think it gets down into laughably bad, other than one or two moments that made me laugh. But
yes,
it's not consistent.
But if anything,
enough.
those were a welcome respite to everything else at that point.
Yeah, at least that was more interesting. It got a reaction out of me. Yeah. So, all right, there you go. That is Single White Female. Coming up next week on the show, which happens just so coincidentally to be episode 100 of Collector's Cut. Our next 90s erotic film, or 90s erotic thriller, I should say. That just means still we're doing porn. 90s erotic thriller is The Last Seduction from 1994. So if you want to check out the movie before we get to it or whatever, you've got the chance. And we'll see you for the rest of the 90s erotic thriller season. Of course, over in the Atomic Cinema Experiment, where we do sci-fi movies, it's the same two of us tackling those. We've been doing some interesting stuff. We've been trying to tackle a few sort of more recent sci-fi movies and episodes that have just hit. Plus, we've been doing some 80s stuff over the last few months. Like we just got RoboCop 2 done a couple of weeks ago, and Last Starfighter. But go check out that. Check out Screams After Midnight that I do with Tim for horror movie reviews. And of course, as I mentioned at the start, you can get bonus content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for all the shows we talk about. Primarily for me and David, we do 2 bonus shows every month where we review movies from the Criterion Collection on the Criterion Cut, or an extra reels where we do some of the worst things ever made. And that's a fun time. So
it's doing a lot of legwork in that sentence there, Pete.
I'm known for my legwork. So, yes, you can go check out that. Patreon is the main place to get all this stuff because it's all bundled together with any bonus content the TV channel might get. But if you want to be a YouTube membership instead as an option, that's also there if you want to do it that way. But otherwise, that is us. So thank you very much for joining. We do appreciate it. Keep watching movies. And if you can get it, it's always nice to have single white diplomat immunity. I don't know.